We are back for another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is a little after 1 o'clock on Thursday, July 21st. Ryan, means we're 15 days away from Notre Dame kicking off fall camp in 2022. I am fired up. I know, look, they've kept us crazy busy this year with recruiting, but man, I've been chomping at the bit to start doing more team. In the next couple weeks, we're going to talk, well, really the next month and a half, we're going to have a lot to talk about with the Notre Dame team. And, we've done some shows in the past few weeks, and we've talked about breakout players and freshmen that are going to emerge. I want to go with some older dudes today, Ryan, and we're going to focus on the offense on this show, and then we'll talk about the defensive players at some point next week. And the focus is going to be sort of like on that last chance you type of, play on words. And what we're looking at is veteran players, juniors and above, that really enter the final season at Notre Dame where this is sort of their last chance. And that could mean a couple different things. For a couple guys on the list, we're going to talk about this is their literally their last chance to make an impact. They're going to play. There's no doubt they're going to play, or there's little doubt they're going to play. But are they just going to be solid players? Do they finally live up to their potential? We'll talk about them. Then there's a couple other guys that are battling for spots and honestly battling for their futures. There's a couple veterans that enter the season, and how well they perform this year could determine whether they're even invited back next year. So we'll talk about them. And then of course, part of that is if they get beat out this year for a number 1 or number 2 role, depending on the position, they're definitely gonna have a hard time, because the people battling for them are younger guys, and you don't often see a veteran get beat out by a younger guy and then come back and beat that guy out later. So it's very interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to name those players, and then with each guy, we're going to talk about what it would mean for Notre Dame if they sort of have the breakout or tap into their potential or have success this season, and then what would it mean for them and for Notre Dame if they don't. Mm-hmm. And I think the first guy to talk about is someone we've talked about in a previous show as a potential breakout player, and that is wide receiver Braden Lindsay. I think that's where we're going to start today, because when I look at Braden Lindsay's history, and I'm obviously joined today by Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting at Notre Dame, but one of the many reasons I hired Ryan is because he also knows the team. It's not just a recruiting guy. He knows the team. He knows the draft. He's a very well-rounded guy. And so want to have you talking team today with us, Ryan. But the thing about Braden Lindsay that's been interesting is we've seen like 3 distinctly different versions of Braden Lindsay in his career. Right? We've seen the injured, guy that's injured and banged up and kind of lost a step and wasn't able to get separation when he hasn't been healthy. We've seen a guy last year that was kind of steady but unspectacular, right? And then we've seen a guy at times who's a really dynamic, big-time game changer type of athlete. Yep. The question going into his last season is, will we still see all 3 of those guys? Will we see only 2 of those guys? Or will we see one of those guys? And honestly, I think the best thing for Notre Dame is that we see 2 of them. And I'm going to throw this out to you, Ryan. Mm-hmm. I don't want to see the injured guy. I do want to see a Braden Lindsay that is steady without the wild ups and downs, which we saw last year. But I want to mix in what we saw last year with some more of what we saw when he was a redshirt freshman, which is the home run guy. When I look at him, Ryan, of all the guys in this list, nobody could have a bigger impact on Notre Dame's success this season than Braden Lindsay becoming the player a lot of us have always thought he could be, and that he's flashed at times that he can be.
No, absolutely. And I would say first and foremost, I'm excited to talk some team, because I texted Brian this morning. I'm like, I had a recruiting dream last night, so I think I need to talk some team ball.
It's time for me to I got to step away from recruiting. I'm having dreams about kids making commitments to Notre Dame.
I barely ever remember my dreams too. And I just woke up. I'm like, well, that was weird and bizarre. But for Braden, for me, Brian, as just a general fan for a second over the last few years, he's been a guy that I've just been anxiously waiting to be that guy, right? Like we saw glimpses of it. Like you said, 2019, you're seeing him on end arounds, reverses, kind of using his speed and his elusiveness in open field and being a home run type of threat. And I think that that's what you need first and foremost, is that implication of his offense, because Lorenzo Styles can make some big plays. Michael Mayer can make his big plays in his own way. And I think that we think also that if a guy like a Deion Colzie and Tobias Merriweather do hit, they can make some big plays too. But there's only one player on this team right now that I would say is a 4-4 or 4-4 flat or less type of athlete at the wide receiver position. Like that is Braden Lindsay. He brings a different style to this offense, kind of that yak guy. Want to talk about a lot of RPO action, getting him involved in the run game at times. He can give you so many different layers to this offense that you need. And the problem is that, like you said, it hasn't always been consistent. If you could just have the finer points that are a little more consistent, just sure hands, don't drop the easy ones. And then you also get the spurts of big plays, an end around every couple games that breaks off for a big one, or a long pass that kind of breaks open for a 50-plus yard touchdown from time to time. That is what he can bring to this offense. And that's what they don't really have. Like, they don't have a guy that I say is a consistent vertical guy. Like, guys can do it in spurts, but not everybody has the home run speed and the playmaking ability that Braden Lindsay does have when he's on his game.
The interesting thing about last year is it was interesting because for me, being at games, watching him play, Florida State game, for example, there were 2 plays where it's like he was open. I mean, he'd beat the guy. I mean, you've seen the all 22, Ryan. Yep. He's open by a couple steps. I mean, and if the ball just gets thrown out, but what happens? Jack Cohn's getting hit, or he's having to scramble, and he doesn't have time to throw the deep ball. Yep. And after a while, Jack Cohn just stopped looking for him. I mean, I think it was Purdue, maybe Toledo. There was a play where Lindsay's opened by like 5 yards on a post route, and Jack Cohn's barely to the top of his drop, and he's taken off. Not because of Jack Cohn, because he wasn't getting time. By the 3rd or 4th game, really by the 4th or 5th game, Jack Cohn just stopped looking at the deep ball, right? And unless he just had an ISO, but those were inside posts, right? The post route to Avery Davis, inside post, where that was his number 1 read. So there were times last year for Braden Lindsay to be that downfield guy, and he just never got the ball. And then eventually teams started coming up and pressing, and that's when he started having problems just like everybody else, because he's never been taught how to properly get off the line of scrimmage. We saw that in the bowl game. I mean, first drive of the game, if you go back and watch that, Ryan, we got some OSU film on the message board today. First drive of the game, I mean, he just runs right by an Oklahoma State corner. I mean, the ball's way underthrown. He has to try. He makes a good attempt for it, can't get it, but he's got that guy beat by a step. If Jack Cohn just throws the ball that he threw to Kevin Austin against Florida State, that's a touchdown.
Yep.
And so even last year he was able to get deep. The balls just weren't coming his way. I think a lot of us look at last year and it's sort of a disappointment for Braden Lindsay. And I'll be honest with you, in some ways it was, but I think for me it was more of a team disappointment. Not so much a Braden Lindsay disappointment, because he had a couple drops, but I thought he caught the ball better, but he made some contested catches. The Cincinnati catch for the touchdown was one of those throws people said, well, I don't know if Braden Lindsay can make that play. The effort he showed on a really wildly underthrown ball against Oklahoma State was something I had criticized him for in the past, of not making plays on those footballs. I kind of view like there were 2 issues last year. Number one, Jack Cohn was not a deep ball thrower because of, I think, not because of Jack. I think Jack threw a nice deep ball, and you go back and watch his Wisconsin film, he threw some really nice deep balls. It was more of there was no time to throw the deep ball.
Right.
Unless, like I said, it was a one-on-one, a quick inside post, or a one-on-one just straight go route. And it was usually he was throwing that to Kevin Austin is usually where that was designed to go.
And even those outside verticals, the timing's off a ton, because I mean, we've talked about their trouble working against press coverage, right? Like that just completely ruins the timing of a route, right? And I think that's another layer, not only to just the pass blocking side of everything, it's also that wide receivers, I don't think, did a good enough job from a technical perspective to be able to get into those proper positions.
Sorry, Ron, I have to comment on us coordinating our shirts today. We did not coordinate the shirts today.
I thought about it when we popped in, though. I was thinking about getting a different shirt, but I was like, it's such a nice shirt.
It is. It is very comfortable. The other part of this too, Ryan, is so that's where Lindsay's got to do better, right? Like he was able to just use his speed to get a step, but oftentimes when he would get that step, it was too late in the play. And that was another thing that factored into it as well. So their opportunities are going to be there for him this year. I think especially with the way that Mayer stepped up last year, if Lorenzo Styles makes the jump that he made last year, I think there's opportunities for Braden Lindsay to be a guy that can be a 30 to 40 touch guy and be at 1,000 yards. I mean, I think that's where he can be now. When I'm talking total total offense. I'm not talking just receptions. I'm talking total offense. And so to me, that's where I want him to be at right now. He's got to stay healthy. Now, if you've seen him this summer, and Vince and I had a chance to see him this summer, he has filled out. He's working hard. I'm hearing things from coaches about his work ethic and things that we hadn't heard all the time in the past. So I think he wants it. And I think that Chancey Stuckey is going to at least improve some of the basics, right? And we saw he was a little inconsistent with the spring. There were some snaps you're like, okay, that's what I'm looking for, Braden. And then other snaps was just trying to run by a guy. And the good news is for the Notre Dame offense, or the Notre Dame defense, is he wasn't running by the Notre Dame corners, which is a good sign because Braden Lindsay runs by a lot of people. But then he made a great contested back shoulder catch in the spring game on a throw. So I think the tools are there. It's just the consistency aspect. But the other big thing for me, Ryan, is the opportunity. And I think that's the biggest, on top of just not having time because of the line to get the ball down the field to him.
Yeah.
I think another part of it is we didn't see enough stuff designed for him to get the ball in other ways. Tunnel screens, look screens, jet sweeps, reverses, things that we have seen from him in the past be successful at. Part of it I understand because you come into last year, he was banged up the whole year before, and he was a little banged up to begin the 2019 season. He was banged up almost all of 2020, got hurt in fall camp, came back for South Florida, gets basically hurt again. He's out for the year against Pitt, basically, or not for the year, but for another month, and he kind of comes back later, and he's a shell of himself. And so you've got this guy, you don't know if he can stay healthy. Do you want to build your offense around what he does when you don't know if he's going to answer the bell every week? Well, last year, Braden answered the bell every week. And so now I think I hope that there's a greater confidence in the coaching staff to say, hey, look, we've got this weapon. He's a big play guy. He's done it in the past. We got to find ways to get him. And it's what do we talk about, Ryan? It's the RPOs, bubble screens, look screens, jet sweeps, reverses, but also some things kind of like what we saw against Stanford, where they use him to motion and isolate him on routes, where you get him off the press. Or if you remember the touchdown he had early against Stanford, they motioned him down, which meant the corner backed off, so he wasn't getting pressed, and then he was able to just smoke the guy on a quick post route. Whether it be crossers, drags, climbs, all those type of things, I think are other things that you need to do more with Lindsay to get him the football more consistently in those situations where he can run. Because that's a big thing. Because I don't want to throw he made a great play against Cincinnati on the back shoulder, but that's not where I want to be designing a million throws to Braden Lindsay.
It's not.
I want to get him in space. And that's the big thing for me.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And I'm Brian. At this point, I'm just going to call it cautiously optimistic. I've been optimistic about the Braden Lindsay thing for a while. I would say if you look at just because we have a small sample size of what Chancey Stuckey has done with wide receivers, obviously. But if you go look back at what Taekwon Thornton did as in 2020, comparative to what he did in 2021, massive improvement. I mean, he went from 17 catches to 1,000 yards just about in one offseason, right? RJ Sneed was another guy that improved dramatically from 2020 to 2021 under Coach Stuckey. So even though there's not a huge sample size of what Coach Stuckey can do as a position coach, we have seen in the 1 year that he took guys that had a lot of tools, but hadn't gotten to this level, the level that their talent kind of dictates, and they accomplished it in a very short amount of time. So that's why I'm, again, cautiously optimistic because of the things you said. We saw Braden Lindsay in the spring. We saw a much more confident and physically impressive football player than we have ever seen. He was walking around with swagger to him, and I know he always had some swagger, but he had a different type of confidence to how he was kind of carrying himself during the spring. So you saw that, and then you couple that with the quick turnarounds that we have seen Coach Stuckey do just last season for Baylor. I think it gives you a lot of optimism that Braden Lindsay can increase a ton from a technical perspective. And he's able to stay healthy and able to clean up a lot of the technical issues. I mean, the kid has a lot of God-given ability. There's never been any question about the ability that Braden Lindsay has.
So the impact that Braden Lindsay has, if he does take advantage of opportunity, obviously home run hitter, and a home run hitter in a lot of different ways, right? You can't just game plan to stop the goes and the posts. We talked about the other routes, the other opportunities. I think it also takes a lot of pressure off Lorenzo Styles, in my opinion. when you can have a guy that can be that field weapon, now all of a sudden, because Lorenzo's a pretty good route runner for his age, and I think he's going to continue to get better as well. And there's a lot of things that I'd like to see Lorenzo be used more on this year now that he's got some experience, some stick routes, some option routes, some out cuts, some things where you are using him from the slot at times, because I don't think Avery Davis is going to be healthy enough to go back to the volume he had last year, at least not early in the year. So you're going to need Lorenzo to be able to play some in the slot, and perhaps Braden to play some in the slot.
Sure.
Depending, as long as you use him correctly from the slot. But with Lorenzo in the slot and then Mayer either also inside or in the opposite slot, there's going to be a lot of focus on some of that inside stuff. And if Braden Lindsay can become a home run hitter, you almost get to the point where, we're okay with Michael Mayer catching a 12-yard end cut against a one-on-one, because we can't afford to let Braden Lindsay go over the top for 70.
Well, that's what I was about to add to the conversation is, I know we're talking about the impact Lindsay can have. The impact is, one, he's going to get some one-on-one opportunities, because they're going to look at those guys, to your point, Lorenzo Styles, they're going to look to Michael Mayer, and they're going to say, those are the guys that we have to stop. Because last time they were on the football field, they were dynamic against Oklahoma State in their own ways. So we're needing to stop that. But then, to your other point, you pop Braden Lindsay in the slot now and let Lorenzo Styles play a little bit outside, and he's able to kind of push everything vertically and get those safeties kind of moving, get those linebackers dropping a little deeper. Then he bangs a 12-yard in, and Lorenzo Styles is just wide open because Braden Lindsay's speed is just to such a level that it's going to clear out some action, right? So the impact is not only with the football in his hands, the impact is also without the football in his hands, because you always, whether Braden Lindsay is being a consistent football player or not, you have to look at that speed and say, that speed is a potential problem for us. If we let him get wide open, that's a big play waiting to happen, right? So even just the threat of that speed is huge. And if he's making plays also on top of showcasing that speed, then you're like, defensively, you're like, man, what am I going to do here now? Like,
it helps the run game as well. I mean, if you can hit a couple jets and a couple reverses, all of a sudden the action off of that matters. When he goes in motion, it matters more, because you have to account for it, because he hit a 50-yard touchdown run on a jet sweep early in the year, if that is what happened, like we saw in 2019. And when you have a mobile quarterback like Tyler Buckner, when you have a speed back like Chris Tyree, or even a hammer like Audric Estime, it's more so with Tyree, but like the thought of Tyree, Styles, and Lindsay on the field at the same time starts to get you a little bit fired up, because if there's a split second hesitation by that field safety, because he's worried about, okay, Lindsay's going in motion, that's the difference between you catching Chris Tyree for a 12-yard gain or Chris Tyree going for 60, right? And we saw that in 2017 a lot with Josh Adams. How many times did we see Josh Adams go vertical for a long touchdown because the backside overhang guy that would normally close on that was worried about Brandon Wimbush coming around on a keep? Right? I mean, that's what having multiple weapons that you have to account for does. We talk a lot about Ohio State because that's Notre Dame's first opponent. When people say, well, how can these guys keep getting open? Why are they not covering Garrett Wilson? Because if you double Garrett Wilson, then Chris Olave and Jackson Smith and Jigba blasting you. If you do enough to where you're going to take two of those guys out of the game, and all of a sudden it's like, well, they're just running it right up down your throat with Travion Henderson, or Chris Olave is going off for 9 catches, right? And the more legitimate weapons you have, the harder it is to defend you, because every team's going to say, we got to take something away.
Sure.
And Braden Lindsay is rarely going to be the guy that teams early in the year say, we're going to take him away. If he can change that and force someone to say, we're going to take him away, the reality is to take away the deep threat, that means you need to have more resources further away from the ball. And that could be, it could be vertically or horizontally, Ryan. It could be further away from the ball outside for over the top. So it could be you're going to have your safety a little bit deeper, so he's not closing on some of the deep ins and drags like he normally would. All those things help your offense. And so that to me is the key. If he doesn't step up, that's the other part. If Braden doesn't step up, then you have a solid 30 catch, 350-yard guy like you had last year, but you lose a little something because he's not that win at the point of, at the catch point all the time. He's not Chase Claypool and Miles Boykin and those type of guys. He's a different type of player. And in order to, it's not just, he's going to play if he's healthy. He's going to play. But if he's just the same guy he was last year, from a production standpoint, he's not a big play guy. Let's say he's not getting open, or whatever the case may be. He's just kind of out there as just a solid guy, and you're not worried about him. You're taking him away with one corner, or, you'll let him have a hitch, but, you're going to rally to the ball, those type of things. Your offense loses the chance to have a big weapon because he can't counter not being a big play guy with contested catches on 3rd and 5. That's not his game, like it would have been maybe the Miles Boykin or Javon McKinley. Yeah. So you lose because like Notre Dame has a chance to have some really explosive playmakers, but there's not like 6 of them. And you look at the skill positions, it's like kind of like 3. You know what I mean? Like it's Lorenzo Styles, Chris Tyree, and Braden Lindsay. As far when I mean explosive, Deion Colsey could be really good. Michael Mayer can be really good. But what I'm saying is Michael Mayer is not the guy you're worried about. Okay, this guy might go 80 every snap. We're talking about like the speed guys, the home run hitters.
Yep,
is kind of what we're referring to, where they scare you because of their speed. There's 3 of them: Lindsay, Tyree, and Lorenzo Styles. So if Lindsay doesn't utilize that for whatever reason, then you lose that and you don't have as much of that, and it makes Notre Dame easier to defend. So that's the counter to if he doesn't step up.
In my mind, I'm just imagining, Brian, a little orbit motion from Braden Lindsay coming behind, almost like he's going to hit a little swing pass, and then you have a little inside zone action to Chris Tyree. Because if I am that front side linebacker, that overhang defender, what do you do in that situation? Because my mind is going, oh, man, I'm either have Braden Lindsay or I have Tyler Buckner on a pull, and you have no possibility of staying in the box at that point, right? And that's where you get Chris Tyree, to your point, getting vertical and going for 70, right? It's just because I always feel like people look at defense sometimes and they go like, why does the defensive coordinator only have 6 in the box? And you're just kind of like, that's not the defensive coordinator's fault. That's just a lot of speed going in different ways, right? Like we have to, because then the flip side of it is, if I don't get that extra defender in the box, then I have Tyler Buckner pulling it and potential of Braden Lindsay also just getting that late, throw outs to the flat. And it's just like, how do you defend that if you don't have that overhang defender, right? So not only does Braden Lindsay put you in quarrel, Tyler Buckner also puts you in quarrel. With those dynamic weapons that you have off of different looks, literally you're going to have 3 different options in one play, right? And it's just like, pick your poison at that point if things are rolling. If Braden Lindsay's a guy, then Tyler Buckner is going to be a more, bigger weapon as a runner as well. Chris Tyree is going to be a bigger weapon as a runner. There's just going to be so many endless possibilities if Braden Lindsay is the guy that we know he can be. It's just about if he puts it all together finally.
Right. All right. Let's move on to the next guy. And I think this is another play that fits into a similar category of Braden Lindsay, where it's not like you're not going into the season necessarily concerned with him getting beat out. It's possible, but that's not necessarily where the discussion is. Sure. And that's Josh Lugg. And so obviously Josh Lugg moves from right tackle to right guard. He's played all over. He started 5 games at right tackle in 2019, started at guard and center in 2020, was okay at guard, bad at center. He also had some back problems. He had no business playing center. That just should not have happened. And then you get out to a situation last year where they move him back out to right tackle. And Josh Lugg had a very interesting season. He was, I would argue, Notre Dame's most steady offensive lineman for most of the year. The problem is when he would make a mistake, and they weren't often, they were big. It'd be giving up a sack. It'd be a false start on the 3rd and 2, and those are things he has to clear up. But what got lost is, and I hate to go there, but I actually thought Pro Football Focus had a pretty decent grade on him last year, amidst a lot of other bad grades. But they actually had a decent grade on him, and they ranked him as the 15th best returning interior lineman in the country in an article that they had out that I'm going to post on the site later today. Jarrett Patterson being number 2. I don't know if I'm ready to jump on board with Josh Lugg being the 15th best returning interior player in all of college football. That means guard and center. So, think about that. That means 130 teams, 3 positions. That's 390 players, right? I hope people don't check my math when we're doing this.
That was good. No, you hit it perfectly. That's good math.
And he's 15 of that,
Out
right?
of 390.
You're right. Yeah. So if he is that, and this is one of those few times I actually want Pro Football Focus to be correct, it has a big impact on this. So I think the biggest thing is Josh has kind of become a bit of a whipping boy for some Irish fans. And there are some that just think he sucked last year. And I'm like, no, I didn't suck last year. It's just most people don't focus on the line. Mm-hmm. They only see linemen when they do dumb things or ridiculous things like Quentin Nelson, right? Yeah. And most linemen don't do that. Most linemen are like Robert Hainsey that just do their job every snap, right? And so with Josh, people kind of lost the fact that this kid was a pretty steady player for most of the year. Yep. He just had some really ugly, bad plays.
Sure.
Now you move him into guard, and I think it's a more comfortable position for him as far as his style of plays, demeanor. When Josh got in trouble last year and he was doing that ridiculous like vertical pass. Now, listen, I have no problem with the vertical pass set. I know some really good O-line coaches that use it and teach it. I don't have a preference on the vertical versus 45-degree pass set. I have no opinion on that. I'm like with everything else. Do you teach it right? And can your kids execute it? That's how I am. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't the vertical pass set that I had the problem with. So vertical pass set, so is a lot of times an offensive line will kind of take like a 45 kick slide out. Some coaches teach just literally like a vertical backwards, pass set for the most part. Mm-hmm. The way that it was taught last year is it was like he was literally on his heels. I mean, it was just so poorly taught. And then guys would just kind of come off the line, and they weren't reaching Josh till he was almost to the quarterback. But then he was on his heels so much they could just then get in his pads and just drive him right into the quarterback. Yeah, that was a technical problem, not a Josh Lugg problem. And the reason I think it was a coaching problem is because they never stopped him from doing it. They just kept having him do it. And so it wasn't all that they would also do a 45 set. I don't know why, like what the coverage when they would do that versus the other, or I mean, I have no clue what the pass scheme or the pass blocking scheme was. But those things kind of got him in trouble. Well, that's not a concern at guard. He's not going to be pass setting like that at guard. No. You're going to get to see him play more of the physical brand of football that if you go back and watch film last year, I think he thrived at. And, so if he can be that guy, Ryan, it all of a sudden you're looking at the right side of your offensive line, and you got 6'7", 315-pound Josh Lugg. You got 6'6", 330-pound Blake Fisher, and you're thinking you might be able to do some things in the run game behind those two kids.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of to reemphasize, it's a shame because – I mean, Josh Lugg was a great soldier last year. He should not be an offensive tackle. I mean, that's just point blank to it, right? Like he has sub 32-inch arms. He's not the longest guy in the world. He's tall, but he's not incredibly long. Like his wingspan isn't great. And I think his athleticism is suitable. It's not like a deterrence. It's fine. But at guard, I mean, you go from a fine athlete at tackle to a good athlete at guard, like instantly, right? Because you're working in closer confines, a lot tighter space. It's more predicated on power, to your point, right? Like we're not going to see vertical sets from Josh Lugg next year. You're going to see a lot of power sets, like one step, get into the chest, and the ability to just kind of move your feet at that point, but to maintain that inside leverage. And I think that's going to be a lot better for him because one thing I like, Brian, is I think he has pretty strong hands. Like when he gets inside and he gets solid positioning, the hand strength is not a deterrence at all. It's just you don't want him working in a lot of space. Like that's just all it comes down to, right? So I think that those things do work to his advantage because I think he has strength to him. I think his foot quickness inside is good. So when you kind of piece the little things together and he has lack of length, he's played a lot of football, man. Like he's a battle-tested dude. And one thing that you have the two young guns at tackle, which we're so excited about, right? Like I am just thoroughly just looking forward to seeing what Joe Alt and what Blake Fisher do as sophomores. I think they're just going to flourish, obviously, right? But you also have Jared Patterson, Zeke Corral potentially, and Josh Lugg inside. Patterson and Lugg are your leaders, de facto leaders, because they've played the most football, right? So, and, Jared's coming off an injury too. So, like, especially now through this offseason, you need Josh to take that step, not only just from a playing perspective, but a leadership perspective. Like, that's the old guy in the room, right? Like,
6th-year senior. Yeah.
6th-year senior, right. Those guys are going to be naturally looking for him. And you saw when Kristofic took over at guard last year, it was kind of just a little more steady, but you need a calming presence inside. And I think that Josh Lugg can be that guy because I think his style fits better inside, and he's played a lot of football. So I think if we get the best version of Josh Lugg, that's big time for the interior of the offensive line.
I'd say go back and you look at his season last year, Ryan, to your point. You look early in the year, he really, I thought, struggled in pass. He would just have some, like I said, he'd have like 35 pass sets, and he'd have 30 that were just real crisp and clean and effective. And then there'd be like 3 or 4, you're like, what was that?
Yeah.
But I do think he got better as the year went on as well. I mean, you just look at the numbers. And again, what do I always say about Pro Football Focus? Terrible grades, terrible in rankings, good at data collection.
Sure.
First 5 games of the year, he gave up, according to them, 16 pressures in the first 5 games.
Do you have what teams those were, Brian?
Yes. First 5: Florida State, Toledo, Purdue, Wisconsin, Cincinnati.
And for some context there, I mean, he is facing guys like Jermaine Johnson and George Karlaftis and some dudes
but
in the first 5.
He gave up 3 against Toledo, right?
Sure.
and he gave up 5 against Purdue. And if you go watch, Karlaftis was doing a lot of his damage on the left side of the Notre Dame offensive line. Josh was getting beat by not just George Karlaftis. You look at the last few games, he gave up 5 total pressures in the last 7 games. And played much better, ran block much better. He was just he was a more comfortable football player later in the year. Now, like you said, they weren't playing as good of teams. I've admitted that. Sure. But there was also some dudes in there that were decent football players, especially like for USC, and he gave up 1 pressure against USC.
Yep.
So this is a kid that I think was a solid player that if he can take another step because of the transition to guard, solidifies it. Because when I look at Notre Dame's offensive line, you remember back and this may be before your time, but back in the day, they had like a strong side and a quick side. You remember when teams would do this in the offensive line and they would switch them? And so like the strong side would move to left and right. There was a time I think that Notre Dame did this. And so it'll be like your power side and your quick side, right? Most teams have gone away from that, and they just kind of have like if the line coach believes in that, he's just going to make the right side his power side and the left side is his quick side.
Sure.
And so you look at this year's potential makeup of Jarrett Patterson and Joe Alt on the left side, technicians, longer at left tackle, athletic guys, right? And then you look at the right side, and it's these big physical, potential mauler types if Josh Lugg can become that kind of guy. So that's what I think really helps. And it's also important too, this can't be dismissed when we're talking about Josh Lugg. Jarrett Patterson's going to bring a setting presence at left guard if that's what the move ends up being.
Yep.
If Josh Lugg can, first of all, answer the bell every week as the starting right guard and be that presence, those 2 guys take a ton of pressure off Zeke Correll.
100%.
You've got 2 veterans, potential captain type of guys, whether they're officially captains or just, unofficial leaders of the team captain type of captain roles. Now, all of a sudden, Zeke Correll can just go do his job.
Sure.
And I think that's important. And that's really important. And I think that is something that Josh stepping up not only impacts the right guard position, but I think it would have a big impact on the center position as well for next season.
I was going to say, you can just look back to last season, right? It's like, I mean, Jared Patterson, I'm not trying to take all the blame off of him, right? Because like he had his bad plays, of course, like every other player does. But I really think that early on in the year, Jared Patterson was struggling because the guards around him were not playing good football. I mean, let's call it down the stretch when Christophic was playing better football and Kane Madden was playing solid football down the stretch, better than he was early in the season. Jared Patterson looked like a lot better player before kind of the injury started picking up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So early on in the year, I think you literally saw exactly what you're talking about. A center is so dependent on players next to him, right? Like, because you got 2 to each side, and your guards are your best friends. So when your guards around you aren't playing well, it hinders the impact that you can have. So I agree completely. We've seen Zeke Correll play good football at center before. We've seen it. And it's very important now that he's settling back in and gaining that confidence back that maybe was lost a little bit last year, to have 2 guys that are your seniors, that are your leaders on this offensive line, and to have that consistency around him. So I could not agree more that it is huge for Zeke Correll and just the center position in general.
I'm just going to come out and say this. It's a fact. This isn't an opinion. This is a fact. There was not a great deal of confidence in the coaching that was being received by the linemen last year. That's just a fact. It's no disrespect. It's just the truth. Right. We could argue whether they should or shouldn't have felt that way. It's not the point. There wasn't a lot of confidence there. And when you're not confident in what you're being taught, you're not going to play well. It's just fact, especially unless you're like just a great player. So for me, Ryan, when I look at this, I think that's another factor in this conversation for Josh Lugg as well. This is the guy that recruited you to Notre Dame. You saw what he can do. There's going to be a buy-in to this, I think, that's going to impact this as well. Yeah. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing what that duo can do for Notre Dame.
When I think that you've had the buy-in already from him and Jared Patterson, right? Because Jared Patterson could have went to the NFL. He could have. If he wanted to get coached by Harry Hiestand, and he didn't want to end his career the way that it ended, right? And I think this, and I don't know Josh personally, so this is pure speculation, but you got to think, I mean, so he's coming back for his 6th year, and I know the NFL wasn't calling to a high degree, right? Like, and he would have gotten a look in the NFL. There's no doubt he will get a look in the NFL after this season. But I mean, I got to think that maybe for a second you're like, maybe a transfer option might be a good idea because it's on the table now, right? Like, it's an easy thing to happen. I'm not saying that ever was something that he seriously considered, but I think Harry Hiestand coming back is one of those things where it's like, oh, this is time now, right? Like, this is my moment. The guy that I wanted to play for is now back, and now I can show that all the misconceptions, or I don't even want to call it misconceptions, all the opinions that are out there on Josh Lugg, he has a chance to prove it wrong. Because the one thing I like about Josh Lugg is that he's a tough kid, man.
Right.
He's got that brand of football in him, and you just see the demeanor that he plays with. Like, he's a tough player. He's a tough individual. So I have to think that he wants to also prove a lot of people wrong, if we're being completely honest, for the season.
Yep. Let's stay on the offensive line. The next 3 guys we're going to talk about are in a different type of last chance opportunity. These are guys that none of these guys are necessarily out of eligibility after the season. And because of COVID, some of them are going to still have several years of eligibility. These are guys that are more going into the season sort of in position battles, either with guys in their grade or younger. And they're in a situation where if they don't step up this year, not even necessarily starters, but at least step up and say, hey, somebody is in front of me right now, but I'm performing well too. And if my number's called, I'm ready to step in.
Sure.
And so it's an interesting group. And I want to stay on the offensive line to begin. And that's Andrew Kristofic.
Yep.
I think Andrew Kristofic enters a very interesting season for his career because obviously he stepped into the lineup and really helped solidify things down the stretch. Yes, again, we've said a million times, we know the competition wasn't as good, but it wouldn't have mattered if they would have played like they did at the beginning of the year. I don't care who they were playing. They were going to get beat. Just go watch the Toledo game, watch the Florida State game. So when I look at that, Andrew, I don't think Andrew played great football last year. I think he played consistent football last year. That was the big thing for him. Now he enters a situation where Zeke Correll just outplayed him in the spring at different positions, but he outplayed him during the spring. From what I was told by sources, there were times down the stretch where they were actually putting Rocco Spindler in with the first team to give him a look because he was, playing well. And Andrew just didn't take that next step. I think he enters a period now where he's got to take that next step. And one of the things that's intriguing about Andrew Gustaf is I would argue he was one of the more raw offensive linemen to sign with Notre Dame. Him and Tosh Baker, I would say, are probably the 2 most. Andrew was a basketball player. He was a guy that was still learning the position of football. They've moved him around from right tackle to left tackle, but, then eventually move him into guard. And it was really his first year as a guard. So he steps into a situation where he doesn't necessarily have to start to be a guy that steps up for Notre Dame this year. Now, obviously, if he comes out and has a great fall camp, he could be in a situation where he pushes Josh Lugg at right guard or potentially pushes Jarrett Patterson back to center if Zeke doesn't build on his strong spring. I think they're going to make this move, but it's a situation where it doesn't mean that, okay, Zeke, you're the guy no matter what happens. I mean, if Andrew Kristofic comes out and outplays him in the fall like he outplayed Andrew in the spring, that could force him his way into it as well. Maybe with Josh's history of back issues, they choose to say, hey, look, we're gonna play a third guard. Well, Andrew has a chance to battle for that. Maybe he gets in every third or fourth series to kind of take some of the snaps burden off of Josh Lugg because of his, he's almost 6'8", back issues. That doesn't necessarily go away.
Sure.
So maybe that's something like that. Or the final scenario is he doesn't really play a lot this year and go minutes, but he has a really good year and he shows himself to say, hey, look, this kid can step into the lineup. In normal situations, a senior that has an additional year of eligibility is not going to get brought back for a fifth year to sort of battle a bunch of young guys. You're just going to go with the younger guys because of the way the numbers are. But Andrew's situation is very unique. Mm-hmm. Even though he's a senior now and normally would only have this year plus 23, because of COVID, he still has 3 seasons of eligibility remaining, including this year. So if he proves himself to say, Andrew was really good, we had guys that were better and we have a really good offensive line, there's more options to say, hey, we're going to bring him back because he can still be a 2-year starter for us.
Sure.
Right. And so that makes this very interesting. Whereas if he doesn't take that leap and let's say Rocco passes him up or Billy Schrouf passes him up or at least catches him, now Andrew's not even necessarily a guy you want to bring back next year, much less for 2 years. So it's really imperative that he have a good offseason to provide depth, potentially push for a starting job. If somebody goes down, you want him to be able to step in and take over the way he did last year. But he's also, he's kind of playing for his future as well, Ryan. And for me, the biggest thing with Andrew Gristoffic is if Harry Hiestand can kind of light a fire under him a little bit, not that Andrew doesn't try hard, but I feel like he's the kid of the guys that have played. Him and Tosh Baker are the 2 guys with the most untapped potential, I would argue, because I feel like Andrew was never taught how to play physical football like he did in high school, right? In high school, he was just kind of getting by. The Notre Dame line was taught passivity, in my opinion. You just watch them play. They were taught passivity. It was like that for 3 of the 4 years Jeff Quinn was there. The only time it wasn't that way was when Chris Watt was there. Mm-hmm. It's not a coincidence. You go watch the 2019 O-line and the 2020 O-line. They're literally either taking a step back or just staying right where they are and catching in the run game last year. It was embarrassing. When they're all doing that snap after snap after snap and it never changes, that's what they're being taught.
Agree.
That's going to be different this year. And so I think Andrew has a chance to really take to that. Mm-hmm. And even if he doesn't step into the lineup to say, hey, I'm a guy that's going to be a force to be reckoned with down the road. If he doesn't take to that, then I think he gets passed up because there's some really talented younger players. I won't say more talented because I think you and I both agree that Andrew Gristoffic is a pretty talented kid when he's on his game.
Agree.
But it's kind of like if I'm going to take a chance on a guy, I'm going to take a chance on the redshirt freshman, not the senior who still hasn't figured it out. So he enters a very, very intriguing period, Ryan. And I know you're very high on him, so I want to kind of hear your thoughts to all of that.
Yeah, I was very high on Andrew Christophic when he came out of Pine Richland, and I was happy to see that he had gotten a role last year and had played solid football down the stretch because I am a believer in his talents. There was at one point, Brian, when he was probably a true freshman coming in that I was like, oh, that guy might be the left tackle down the line. Like it could be. Because the kid is 6'5", decent length, and he's a good athlete, man. Like there's building blocks to work there for Andrew Christophic, and I think you've seen it in flashes. It's just it hasn't been consistent, obviously. And in this past spring, we had some availability to it. Zeke Corral forced the hand of Harry Hiestand and the rest of the offensive line and said, like, I need to play, right? So the more natural thing from a size perspective and from just a natural fit perspective is Zeke Corral's a better fit inside at center. And Jared Patterson has a body type and a style that can play well at guard. So that's the move we're going to make. And it's pretty odd that Andrew Gristoffic is obviously a positioning battle against Josh Lugg and Jared Pat, and like he's obviously going against the guards. But Brian, his real battle is he needs to look better than Zeke Corral.
Right.
That's the most easy because it's possible that maybe he outplays Josh Lugg and maybe that's the transition. But the more likely spot is that you're play better than Zeke Corral if you're trying to legitimately get a starting spot. You beat out Zeke Corral as the 5th best offensive lineman because Jared Patterson is going to play. And Jared Patterson also gives you a lot of flexibility because now if he's not a great guard, we can move him into center, right? And he can give that type of flexibility to our offensive line. So it is it's not the pure make it or break it year because it's not the last that we could potentially see of Andrew Gristoffic, but it could be the last chance that he gets to start. It possibly could. Or to have a legitimate role, because like you said, if he plays well, and it's just like, Andrew, like, you're close, man. You're just not quite there. Then we know that Josh Lugg's gone next year. We know that Jared Patterson's gone. A spot will open back up. But the key is, to your point, Billy Stroud's coming, man. Those guys are coming. They're good football players that are coming up the pipe right now for Notre Dame. Rocco Spindler, to name just a couple. Hopefully Jody Tenona is able to be a part of the future plans. Like, there's some dudes that are coming, man. So if you do not have a breakout, or I don't want to say breakout, but if you don't have a darn good offseason and then transition that into fall camp and at least solidify your spot as the sixth best offensive lineman or the next guy in for maybe a couple different spots, then you're in a tough spot there, man. Because I'm sure, I don't know what his graduation status will be, but he's a senior in the classroom, right? So grad transfer routes, is it something he's content with coming back as a fifth year? Is the team going to want him back as a fifth year? There's a lot of different variables that need to kind of be figured out. But at the core of this issue, or not issue, at the core of this situation, Andrew Gristoffic needs to step up, and he needs to be the type of talent that he is.
Because it's also about looking forward to the future, because he does have 2 years. So then you start thinking about Charles Jagasol, Sullivan Absher, guys like that. So I think it is a big year for Andrew Gristoffic. And if he steps up, this offensive line is going to have really, really good depth. And here's the other thing. It's not outside the realm of possibility that if Andrew Gristoffic is clearly your sixth best offensive lineman, that if a tackle goes down, you don't bump him out to tackle. Maybe if like Joe Alt goes down, you bump Blake Fisher to left and you put him at right. If Blake goes down, you may just move Andrew Gristoffic out to tackle at right tackle because he's played there before. So that's the other thing too, is I think he's played center. So he has a lot of positional flexibility. I mean, and maybe center's a position where he's more comfortable at. So
could be.
The point is he needs to play well enough to where Harry Hiestand says, I got to figure out a way to get this guy on the field somehow.
Yeah.
And that's the key for him.
I'll say this, Brian, the struggles that Notre Dame's offensive line had last year, it can be a blessing in disguise if guys step up. Because one thing that they could have is if the offensive line solidifies the way it's looking like right now, if Andrew Gristoffic is still playing good football and Michael Carmody is still playing good football, then you have now created depth for your offensive line and guys that have played multiple positions in the past. And that could be huge for this offensive line moving forward. It's insurance, if anything.
So, Ryan, let's move on. Couple skill guys, kind of. Another wide receiver I want to talk about, and that's Joe Wilkins Jr. He is in a similar situation to Andrew Gristoffic, except he is in the fifth-year version. We've talked a lot about Notre Dame's lack of depth at receiver, and we say there's 4 scholarship receivers planning to come back in 2023, excuse me. And that's Lorenzo Styles, Deion Colsey, Jane Thomas, and then Tobias Merriweather. Well, technically, Braden Lindsay and Joe Wilkins both have additional years of eligibility remaining.
Yep.
I don't see a scenario in which Braden comes back, especially if he does what we think he can do. Joe Wilkins enters a very interesting period as well, because he could be a guy that you say, hey, look, if you don't get like a 4th receiver or a 5th receiver in his class and you feel you need another receiver, do you hit the transfer portal for a guy for a year, or do you bring Joe Wilkins back for a 6th year if he's willing to do it? Well, that only happens if Joe does 2 things. Number 1, stay healthy. It's been an issue for him in his career. Number 2, you got to start being able to make some plays. Now, I think that what we both would agree on that Joe brings to the table is maturity and leadership. I think Joe's a hard worker. I've never heard anything bad about him as a kid. I've only heard glowing things about him as a young man. I think he could bring a lot of leadership to the table. But he's got to step up and show that, hey, I can play. Now, I don't expect him to be healthy at the beginning of the year. I don't think he'll be in the rotation early. But whenever he comes back, he's got to show that, hey, I can play here. Because number 1, the hope is that Joe can return sometime during the second half of the season. I'm just throwing, a hopeful situation. Maybe it's earlier, but he doesn't get into the rotation till midway because he's got to get himself back into shape, right? Because he's in a unique situation. He hurt himself in the fall, came back, right? I think he got hurt against Cincinnati, right? Came back, starts to get into shape, and then gets hurt again in spring practice.
And he was playing pretty well in the spring practice we were at before he got hurt, unfortunately.
Right.
So it's yeah.
And so he's got to step up and play, Ryan, because if he can be a factor, even if number 1, what does Joe Wilkins do for you if he steps up? a group that's going to be light on depth gets a player back second half of the year that can take some of the pressure off from a snap standpoint. That's a big plus. But you want to have someone that can come in and take pressure off snaps wise. But if that guy can't make plays, it makes you easier to defend.
Sure.
And so he's got to step up and show that he can make plays and be a guy that can do more than just block and take some snaps off. Now, he did a little bit last year, had a great catch for a touchdown against Florida State. But I think Joe struggled with the same thing that a lot of these other kids struggle with. He didn't know how to play. And you watch the games against some of the bigger, more physical corners, he didn't know how to get off the line. He doesn't know how to execute certain aspects of his route package. And so he's another guy that I think needed a better coaching, and he's going to get it. Yeah. But how much of it will he get if he's not out there? That's a big question mark. So I think Joe stepping up could impact, honestly, the next 2 receiver depth charts, or not, to where now you're forced to go get another freshman or a grad transfer or some other type of transfer, because you can't justify bringing Joe back if he can't stay healthy, and B, can't make plays. You're going to have to try to find someone that can help you. So I think it's a big year for Joe Wilkins in a lot of different ways. And it may not be like the first guy on people's minds when they think of guys who really enter in this conversation, but I think Joe needs to very much be in this conversation, because he could end up being a guy that could be a big help to Notre Dame, not as a go-to guy, but in a way where he provides a lot of important attributes to your rotation.
I mean, because that you're going to have Avery Davis at some point. But like you said, is he going to start the year kind of still banged up? There's a question mark to there. Otherwise, besides for Braden, obviously, and Avery, Brian, you're depending on a lot of younger guys, right? Like, you're depending on guys like Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather, potentially, and Jaden Thomas, all sophomores or younger, right? So if you get to a point where it's the young guys that are kind of making up the majority of the plays, you still need a calming presence in that room, right? Like a guy that because, I mean, Lorenzo Styles feels like he's been here forever, even though he's only going to be a sophomore in college, right? Like, but he still needs mentorship. He still needs a guy to kind of lead and to show him how to go about his business. I think we all feel good about Joe Wilkins in that role, right? Like, at worst, he's a calming presence, and he's a guy that is going to exude work ethic and give them good habits as far as how you work at the craft, right? So I think that is vital for this team, is the fact that it's a calming presence. And Joe is one of those guys, and we talked about this a little bit before, Joe can play a little bit of everywhere, right? Like, you don't have to just pencil him in as a W or to the field or in the slot or whatever. Joe Wilkins can play a little bit all over the place, which I think is also big for you, because it gives you some alignment versatility. It's not Joe's just a W. Joe is just in the slot. Joe is just here. If he's playing good football and he's healthy, he can line up a couple different spots, which gives you other possibilities with Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey and Tobias Merriweather and different alignment possibilities in different packages, right? So I think that that's a big thing for Joe's impact on the game. And like you said, if Joe wants to have another opportunity potentially after the 2022 season, he's got to play good football, because if he's just injured or just not effective, roster spots are tight right now as we're talking. And we know for a fact that Notre Dame's going to bring in 3 wide receivers in next year's class at worst in 2023, maybe 4. So he's another guy where it's just like these younger guys are going to start to kind of gain more steam if you're not a legitimate, consistent member of this passing game. So I think from leadership perspective, from a depth perspective, and from a perspective that does he want to play more football, it's absolutely a make it or break it year. There's no doubt about it for Joe Wilkins.
We're going to the 5th guy. And this one's going to be very interesting, because this is an not underclassman. He's an upperclassman, but he's the youngest guy in this group. And that's Kevin Bauman, a tight end. His scenario is completely different, because he's just a junior. Now, a lot of juniors at Notre Dame are on pace to graduate after 3 years. Okay, so that's part of it. But he's in a situation now where he's been banged up a lot during his career. He enters this season with a golden opportunity to step into the rotation. I mean, a golden opportunity, not just George Takis transfers. And I'm not saying this is a positive, like, oh, good for him that Mitchell Evans got hurt. But the reality is as much as it stinks that Mitchell got hurt, it does create an open opportunity. And we need to be able to say that without it coming across like, like we're glad that Mitchell got hurt. We're not, but somebody's got to step in. They're not going to like go out there with like a 10 person and like in memory of Mitchell Evans is, pinky toe, right? I mean, somebody's got to step into the role. And so with Mitchell out, Kevin Bauman steps into it where Kane Barong is coming back from an injury. Eli Raron's coming back from an injury, but they're going to be coming back hungry and they're talented guys. Sure. If Kevin Bauman can't step into the lineup now, it's never going to happen. You're not going to get beat out by a younger Kane Barong and a younger Eli Raron or a younger Holden Stace. And then all of a sudden next year, you're going to go out and beat those guys out. Notre Dame's going to play 12 personnel. There's no doubt about it. No doubt about it. The question is can Kevin Bauman be one of those guys? That's the question, because if he does, he gives you a bigger bodied guy and a veteran presence and those type of things. But if he doesn't, it's almost kind of like it's time to, it's almost like it's kind of like, hey man, we appreciate you, but you've been passed up by younger guys. And, that's just kind of the reality. So he enters a very important period to where he's either going to step in and be the 4-star type of guy he was, or he's going to find himself passed up and basically never really be that guy at Notre Dame.
To reiterate it again, injuries stink no matter what it is, right? It is semi-ironic, though, that what's held Kevin Bauman back during the majority of his career is injuries, and he might have this big opportunity because injuries around him. You mentioned Mitchell, you mentioned Eli coming back, you mentioned Kane Barong coming back from injury. This is going to give Kevin Bauman a big opportunity. And, I think people forget about Kevin because obviously he's in the same recruiting class as Michael Mayer, who is a star and potentially the best tight end in college football. But Kevin Bauman was a really high recruit in his own right? Like he was a top 200 type of kid by a couple different platforms coming out. I remember him coming out of New Jersey, and the kid was a stud, right? So there's obvious talent there. This is just a situation where Notre Dame is always going to recruit tight ends at a very high level. You mentioned Eli Raron, the greatest athlete that has ever lived at the tight end position, is going to be in here soon, Brian. Eventually, he's going to be healthy. And I know you're reading, so you're trying not to pay attention to what I said.
I heard you. Cool. I'm just trying not to respond to it. Most explosive player in the history of tight end play.
Best tight end that's ever lived.
We need to explain what we mean by that to people that are on the board. Somebody put on the board that it was reported by another outlet somewhere that Eli Raron ran like this absurd 10-yard split time, which like if
1.46
or something like where if he had that time at the combine last year, he would have been the 4th fastest player at the combine, not 4th fastest tight end, 4th fastest player. Significant. Like Kyle Pitts, I think was like 1.4 at 9. Most tight ends are like in the 5s. There's guys in the 1.6s. And this was like 3 months after, like ACL surgery. Like, come on, so.
And last year's combine was like a freaky year for testing.
Yes.
Too,
yes.
so.
And I think it would have been 4th or 5th of all of them. There was like no safeties better, no linebackers, like it was like 2 corners and a receiver. It was like it. And like the receiver was like remember that little 5'9" guy that ran like an insane 40 time? Like he was one of those guys too. I think he was like
Calvin Austin.
Yeah, it might have been him. Probably. But it just was one of those things where it's like, okay. But the point is, we're just having some fun. We actually are very high on Eli Raron. He's a great player. So when we say that, we're being sarcastic, but there's a backstory to it, and we're just having some fun with it. And Ryan likes to tweak me with it, during the show. Him and Sean like to tweak me and get me fired up. So I kind of dig it because I like being fired up. It's fun.
I had to bring it up because I like that you kind of added to that though, Brian, is the fact that I think Eli Raron is going to be a stud. Like I am not throwing shit at Eli Raron. Right. He's going to be a really good football player. But the point I was making is that you have some really talented dudes. Holden Stace, Eli Raron, Kane Barong, we've mentioned. You have some dudes that are going to be back at some point, right? And Kevin Bauman has a chance to cement himself as the second tight end behind Michael Mayer. It's very possible, but has to stay healthy because that's been the big, hindrance to him as a football player so far. And 2, he's got to beat out some dudes at tight ends. Like he's going to have to, because those guys are going to be back at some point. So it's a big year for Kevin Bauman. I think he has all the talent to be that second tight end. It's just, is it going to happen? And if it's going to happen, it's got to happen now. It has to.
Right. So, Ryan, I want to answer a question here that somebody threw out because I think somebody misunderstood what we said. Antoine Porcher-Radeau says Notre Dame doesn't have 4 scholarship wide receivers. They have 7. We said they will only bring back 4 next year from the current roster. That's what we're referring to. So when you look at projecting to the 2023 roster, there's only 4 guys that are scheduled to come back for that next year. So that's what we're referring to. And that's where, a Braden Lindsay or potentially a Joe Wilkins Jr. could have an impact. Thank you. And that's what we're referring to. So just so we're clear, we're talking about who's scheduled to come back next year. Returning players. They're going to have more than 4 guys on scholarship next year because they're going to have the freshmen. We're talking about returning players on scholarship. So you don't have to count on freshmen to have to go out there and be that guy. That's what we're referring to in this instance. So, Ryan, that kind of is going to wrap up our show on kind of that last chance you type of thing. We're going to get to the defense next week because that's going to be a lot more interesting conversation. And there's a lot more about the position battles involved next week. Where like this one didn't necessarily have a ton about position battles. I mean, Joe Wilkins isn't necessarily in a position battle. He's not even healthy right now. Bauman's in a position battle for like the number 2 job. Next week when we talk about the defense, it's going to get really interesting because there's going to be a lot more of this guy's battling for a starting job, but now he may not even play. You know what I mean? And it's going to be a lot more of an interesting conversation for that next week. So definitely stay locked into that. And we're gonna have some fun. We're gonna have some fun with that. There's no question about it because the defensive conversation is going to be very interesting. We're going to go to the mailbag next, but before we do, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave us a 5-star review. So, Ryan, let's get into the mailbag. It's going to be some interesting stuff. We obviously have some stuff about receivers. I wanted to start off with some things about the show. Brandon K asked, and this is going to be for you, Ryan, because you're my draft expert. He says, if Lindsay has a breakout, what is his NFL draft outlook?
I would say right now, because I have gotten some feedback from spring grades as far as what the NFL values players right now. Lindsay's a guy that is rated as a priority free agent, so a guy that would not be drafted. So I would say, Brandon, the best case is that he gets into draftable territory. Because one thing that I know about Braden Lindsay is that Lindsay, whether it's at the combine or at his pro day, is going to blow things up, right? Like he's going to have a really good showing. So if he's able to show consistency this year and couple that with nice testing, then I think that he could be a draftable player. He's never going to be a highly draftable player because I don't think he's going to have the volume. I don't think he has the impact as far as, being a guy that's going to be a high volume type of player, right? But as a gadget type of wide receiver that has an impact and with how today's game manufactures space so much, I think you could see him 6th, 7th round if he has a breakout. I think that that's very possible. It's just some things, 1-year wonder and injuries, and some things are going to hold him back a little bit. Sure. But I think he could get into draftable territory if he has a big year.
I want to ask you about this, right, Ryan? Because I think you made a comment that I'm very curious to hear your response to. So you said 1-year wonder. He enters the year with 50 catches for 667 yards. Yep. He also has almost 300 rushing yards. So it's not like he's a guy that's like never played before. It's just the consistency aspect of it. So my question would be, so if he goes out there and let's say he has 40 touches for 900 yards, right? Just total touches.
Yep.
You think no matter what happens, like the combine, stuff like that, I'm just trying to make sure I'm clear. I'm not arguing with you. You think no matter what happens to the combine, there's no chance he moves into like higher than round 6 is what you're thinking?
I think it's very unlikely, for being honest. I mean, because next year's wide receiver class, although it doesn't look quite as good as the last couple of years, there's a lot of depth to it. It does.
That's just what we're going to have to say every year now. I mean, I can't remember the last time we didn't say that about receivers. I mean, it's just because so many teams are running 3-4 receiver offenses now. I mean, it's insane.
It is insane, man. The last 3 years of wide receiver draft has been just nuts, right? But I think when you couple everything together, Brian, like I would be surprised if it was any higher than like a 6th or 7th round flyer, just because, I mean, you said 600 yards and then 300 yards receiving. I mean, so in theory, in this, for making like a little speculation, if he has 900 yards this year, that's as much as he's had in his entire career leading up into this season, right? So he's going to have that 1-year wonder tag to him. Even more importantly, though, as far as negatives go, it's going to be the injuries, right? Like he's Braden Lindsay's been a guy that's been banged up a decent amount, so he's going to have to pass the medicals and kind of ease people's minds in that department. But I think when you couple everything together, I don't think that he's going to be a guy that like great year, 4th round pick. Like I don't really see that personally.
It would have to require him to have like he has to become like the guy for Notre Dame this year. Is that, I mean, would that be the thing that would vault him?
If he has like 1,000-something yards and he's super consistent,
like he has a Will Fuller, TJ. Well, here's
something.
one. He has a TJ Jones type of breakout, because I think that's interesting, because I think TJ is a very similar player to Braden coming. He was never more than a role player his first 3 years. Was healthier than Braden, not as fast as Braden. Goes out in his last year, has 1,000 yards receiving, and he's still a 6th-round draft pick. The reason I ask is because TJ was more quick than fast. I think he ran a high 4.4,
something like that. Yeah.
I don't know if Braden will break into the 4.3s. I don't know if he'll be that kind of speed. I think he's probably like most. But let's say he does. Yeah. Do you think with a TJ Jones type of breakout season, do you think that would vault him in because of the speed difference, or do you think that's just kind of his wheelhouse for the draft?
I don't think it would, because I think, Brian, like when you're talking about drafting guys to that degree, like 4th round or higher, you're talking about guys that I think are it's really dependent upon volume at the next level, right? Like would you anticipate TJ Jones, although they are different players, it's a good example, although he's a much different player than Braden Lindsay from a speed perspective and from the ability to make big plays, TJ Jones was always just going to be a role player on the next level, right? That's why he was drafted in the 6th round. Although he had a really nice season kind of leading up to the draft, he wasn't a guy that was going to project to be a 1st or 2nd receiver. Like that was just never going to be a thing. I think it's the same thing for Braden Lindsay. Braden Lindsay is going to be the guy that's a yak threats, guy that can, do some gadget stuff, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to warrant 1st, 2nd receiver volume.
Sure.
So either way, his role, I don't think is going to be projecting forward being high enough to be much higher than that personally.
He'd be a guy I'd be very curious about possibly being a return guy for Notre Dame this year.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be a thing that could maybe bump him up to 5, if with a breakout season. So I appreciate you letting me push back. I just wanted to kind of dive into that, just kind of see, where your thoughts were on that. I don't necessarily disagree with you. I think there's enough, the injury history, the lack of production, is he number one, the size, he's not a real big guy. I just kind of feel like, I always feel like this, Ryan, and you and I know this, a guy from a big time program that starts getting in the 4.3 range, all of a sudden starts having a different conversation about him. Perfect example, Taekwon Thornton.
That's what I was going to say. Anytime a guy busts out a 4.3 after having a good season, it's always going to rise you. So it's always possible. The role is kind of where I get stuck with it.
And I don't, like I said, I don't disagree with you. I'm just, all I'm saying is the pro day could make things a little interesting for me.
No argument.
Is all that I would say, because that it only takes that one team to fall in love with a guy, and that's the fun thing about the draft.
Yep, sure is.
Let's get to some more questions. That was a really good one. I'll answer this one real quick. Brandon K. If Lindsay or Davis get hurt, do they have eligibility to come back? Avery Davis has no eligibility left. This is his 6th season. Braden Lindsay, whether he gets hurt or not, could come back for a 6th year, I believe. Because I think I'd have to go look at his 2016 stats, 2020 games played, but I'm pretty sure. So basically 18, he redshirted. So that's not a year of eligibility. He played 19, 2020 doesn't count, 2021. So technically Braden Lindsay was a redshirt sophomore last year.
That's crazy, man.
Just based on COVID, right? Am I correct on that?
No,
so because he was a redshirt freshman in 2019, 2020 doesn't count, so that makes him. So technically this year he's a redshirt junior, even though he's a 5th-year senior eligible, like in the classroom. COVID jacks this whole thing up, so I don't even think he needs an injury. If I'm understanding the rules correctly, I don't think Braden Lindsay needs an injury because he's already had the red shirt, right? What he couldn't do, like Kurt Heinisch couldn't come back this year without having an injury last year. Like if Kurt would have got hurt in the first 4 games and not played, he could have come back for a 6th year because Kurt never had a redshirt year. Braden did. Braden had a redshirt in 2018. So that's what makes it a little bit different.
The eligibility stuff is so funky, man. Brian, I told you about the one kid that He made a freshman All-American team on the FCS level. He was a redshirt freshman technically, but he was a fourth-year player. Did I tell you that one?
Yeah. No. Yeah, you did. Yes, you did. It was nuts. Absolutely nuts. Absolutely nuts. And to answer the question too, if Braden Lindsay wanted to come back next year and he was healthy this year, and he's like, look, I just love college and you guys want me back, I'll come back. And I'd take him back. I don't think that's going to be an option. Meaning I don't think he'll want to come back for a sixth year. It would be my thing. Now, what would be interesting is if he does have a good year, but he's still not getting good NFL love. And he's like, if I come back for another year, now you have the 2 years of production, maybe that jumps it, but that'd be a different. Let's see how he does in 2022 first before we go down that
before
path.
We get there.
Right.
We get there.
Exactly. Got a super chat from Ryan Olenek. Ryan, thank you very, very much for that. Hey, guys, it's been a while since I could catch a live show. Welcome back. But I love all the content expansions. So awesome. Thank you. Question. If Avery and Lindsay both have a good year, who is the higher draft choice?
I think, well, that's an interesting question, honestly.
Right.
First and foremost, great name, Ryan. I love the name.
It's close. One letter off, but it's close.
Right now, Avery is the more well-liked guy in NFL circles because he's brought you a lot more consistency than Braden Lindsay. But I would say here, if both guys hit their ceilings, it would be Braden Lindsay, in my opinion. Because to Brian's point, with the 40 time he could potentially run and the dynamic element that he brings to the game, I think NFL teams would prefer that as long as everything else checked out. But obviously that's a big if, right? Like we need to see Braden Lindsay break out. All things equal, if Braden Lindsay's a good football player and Avery Davis is also a good to very good football player next year, I think it would be Avery Davis, but a Braden Lindsay breakout would make things a lot more interesting in that conversation.
So for you, you're talking about if Braden has like the kind of TJ Jones breakout we're talking about.
Not even TJ. I would say this, Brian. If Braden Lindsay had what you talked about before of like a 40 catch, 900 total yard type of season, and he runs in like the high 4.3s or 4.4 flat, then I think that he might surpass Avery Davis. But if he doesn't have a dynamic season from a receiving perspective, and he's just solid, like he's just a solid to good player, then I think that Avery's would overtake it easily because I know that Avery Davis has draftable grades from NFL teams right now. He does. So
I would think Avery would, it's my opinion as a non-draft expert, as I just kind of looking and studying what the NFL does, I would think unless Braden has a TJ Jones type of breakout, I would actually think that Avery would have the higher draft profile if he's healthy. And if he gets back to his pre-injury 40 times, because what we've been told is Avery Davis is one of the 5 fastest kids on the team. He just doesn't always play fast because of the way he's used in the slot. But we've seen at times, Clemson 2020, Purdue last year, he can stretch the field. I think the reason I would say that, Ryan, is because like what you talked about. I think that Avery Moore fits into an NFL role because of his ability to be he's a really good route runner. He's good in the slot. He can move the chains. I think he could bring more of a role there than maybe Braden, who's more of an outside guy. Braden's game would have to nuance quite a bit for me to view him as a guy that could go the next level and play the slot, where I think Avery's transition to that would be a little bit cleaner.
I definitely think that it's cleaner. I think Avery, like you could sell me that Avery Davis gets into the right system, like New England or like one of those systems where like, wow, Avery Davis is catching 60 passes a year. That's crazy. Like I didn't see that coming out of college, but I think that he is definitely a more potential higher volume player than Braden Lindsay. I don't think Braden Lindsay's ever going to be a high volume guy in the next level, but he can have an important role. It's just not going to be in a high volume.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. I would like to see Braden break out in a way that we have to have this conversation next year.
Agree.
That would be fun because I'm a little bit more optimistic he could actually jump up a round or so. But after watching Kevin Austin go undrafted, it's going to have to come with a lot of technical improvement as well. That's the thing.
Got to remember that year, which I should have calculated a little better. Last year's draft was the highest number of draft eligible players ever.
Right. I get that.
A good margin.
But when you're 6'2", 215, you run a 4.43 with an almost against 40-inch vertical jump, and you average almost 20 yards a catch as the leading receiver for Notre Dame, and you don't get drafted, there's some red flags there.
I think in a typical year that Kevin Austin's easily drafted. This year, I think that he would have.
But I feel like a guy that wasn't drafted isn't all of a sudden going to be a third-round pick.
Not third round.
That's my point, right? So if Kevin Austin, who has all the physical measurables, could fall. It's not going to take one breakout year. Now, the difference is Braden comes in with a lot more pass production than Kevin Austin, and not nearly like a lot of Braden's injuries have been like hamstring, quad. Right. It's not like torn ACL, busted shoulder. It's been smaller stuff in my opinion. So that's
soft tissue injuries.
Yeah. Stuff that if you go a couple years and that's not an issue, you're not getting red flagged for it as much as you did before, especially because Braden's big injury happened during the COVID year. And I got to think there's a lot of people like, well, that was a weird off season. Like kids weren't, it was just
throw it out.
There's a lot from 2020. I'm just chucking out of here, and just like not even sweat it. Here's an interesting one for you, Ryan, from God Country, Notre Dame Barbecue and Coffee. Mailbag question if time. We have time, buddy. That's the nice thing about our show. We don't have hard breaks. We don't have shows coming up that we got to end for, like we keep talking as long as you guys have questions. Or we just run out of steam, which you guys have gotten us to that point a couple times this summer, which I love. Here's the question, mailbag question time, Ryan. I'll kick this to you.
Mm-hmm.
Can you guys compare Charles Jagasol and Blake Fisher? How similar are their games, and who has the higher floor and higher ceiling?
It's a very interesting comparison. I know this one was actually thrown into the chat before we even started the show. So me and Brian actually talked a little bit about this one. I've never made the comparison. So this one is like fresh, it's an interesting one. So Blake Fisher was a more advanced player at a similar age, right? Like coming out of high school, Blake Fisher was a little more ready to play from a technical perspective. We'll see if Charles takes a step forward as a senior, but as of what we've seen of Charles Jagasol compared to what we saw of Blake Fisher, he's a little more advanced. I would say for me, I think that Blake Fisher is a little more physically developed as a high school player. Like he has a little bit of a denser frame. Charles Jagasol, I think, has a frame where he's going to carry a bunch of weight. I think that they could end up being around the same size. Like I think they both could be 6'6", 330 pounds at their peaks when they're in college, right? So
they just get there a little differently. Charles would have to add weight. Blake is losing weight to get to that 325, 330 thing. Yeah.
Yep, 100%. So it's gonna come at different parallels, but eventually I think they could get to a similar size profile. I believe, and I would love to hear your opinion on this, Brian. Both guys are very naturally strong. I actually think that Charles Jagasol might have a little more natural power than Blake Fisher.
Yeah.
A little bit more.
I do, because I think Blake throws his weight around a little bit more than Charles.
Yes.
And I also think that Blake plays with better technique. I'll say this. I do agree with that. I think he's got more punch than Blake.
Yes.
I still think Blake has got the better floor and the better ceiling, in my opinion.
Agree 100%.
Right. I mean, thing for me is
Blake's a better athlete, in my opinion, right? Like just a little better of an athlete.
From what we've seen, that's the thing I'm interested to see from Charles with better coaching. I kind of feel like there's some untapped athleticism in there that we haven't had a chance to see because of the coaching and being so raw. But I would tend to agree with you. I think Blake's obviously, like you said, more naturally bigger. Mm-hmm. And I think Blake seems to be longer, a little bit longer.
Yep.
I think when I look at Blake, again, he was a kid that was a top 50 caliber recruit, in my opinion, as a junior. Mm-hmm. Borderline 5-star kid as a senior. I think Charles has a ways to go to get there, which is where the floor is higher. I think Blake was a guy that was going to play as a freshman.
Sure.
We didn't know that he was going to be what he was as a freshman, before the injury, but he was going to play as a freshman. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had people told me that were at fall camp that were saying last year in spring practice. This was in spring practice. Mm-hmm. I had somebody tell me, and it was repeated by others in the fall, he's their best offensive lineman. It was a former player, a guy that had played under Heastan, was back for a practice. He's like, dude, that freshman, I don't know his name, but that freshman is the best offensive lineman they have. I think from the conversation, by best, I think he meant most talented, not necessarily was the best.
Sure.
But, I mean, he's an incredibly gifted player. I mean, you just don't see guys that are 6'6", 330 that can move like Blake can move when he's healthy.
Yeah.
The ceiling is similar, because I think here's the reason I say the ceiling is higher on top of just the talent. I think Blake could play left tackle in college.
Agree.
I don't know if I would say I'd draft him to play left tackle. It's early for that, right? Let's see how he develops, but it's not out of question to think that Blake could be a left tackle in the right system in the NFL.
Sure.
If he progresses. I don't see that for Charles. I see Charles as a right tackle guard.
Sure.
Now, I think it could be a good one. And I think, again, we don't really rank kids off their NFL production. But as I look at Charles Jagasol and I see what kind of guys become high draft picks in the NFL, I see nothing that makes me think, if coached right and working hard, and I don't think anybody questions his work ethic, that he can't be a first-round caliber draft pick. No question Charles has that. But Charles is more of a 15 to 20 draft pick in the first round, where Blake is more of a top 5 to 10 potential draft pick in the first round. Does that, is that make clear? So again, both could be great, but it's like Mike McGlinchey, I thought, was overdrafted at 9. I think Quentin Nelson was underdrafted at 6.
Yes.
Right. And that's kind of how I view it.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. Good question though. Very good question. Patrick Bird, how would you rank the wide receivers from the last 3 classes? So Patrick, I'm not sure when you talk about last 3 classes, I'm not sure if you want to kind of 20, 21, and 22, or if you're talking about 21, 22, and 23. So I'm going to go 21, 22, and 23. So that's kind of how I'm going to go, Ryan. So let's kind of who the best guy, just as they were as prospects, as far as what we know. So Lorenzo Styles through senior year, Tobias through senior year and all that, but these guys through their junior year. So just what they were kind of by the time their high school careers were over, or up to the point we have knowledge now. My number one guy is still Tobias Merriweather. That's still my number one guy. And I've been back and forth on my 2 to 7 is a little bit more debatable, and I've been back and forth and all, but the one I've been consistent on is my number one guy is Tobias Merriweather. Who's your top guy? Would it be him, or is it Styles?
It would be Styles. I'm like fighting with it a little bit because I'm like Merriweather and maybe I'm still fighting with it a little bit. I think I would defer to Lorenzo Styles, to be honest with you, though.
This is coming out of high based on what he was coming out of high school. Okay.
Yep.
He's my 2. So I mean, it's not one of those ones where I'm going to be like, I think if we were talking about NFL draft, right, or where we'd have him, it would be what's your need.
Sure.
There's going to be teams that are going to need a guy like Lorenzo more than Tobias. But if I'm just saying who's the best player, I'm going Tobias. Who would you have Tobias number 2? Is he definitely your number 2? Okay.
Yep.
Here's where it gets interesting. So when we talk about rank, I'm going to say we're going to include the floor and the ceiling together. So just that's, so not like who, if they all maximize the potential, but just combining the 2 things, good and the bad, floor and the ceiling. How would we rank them that way? Which is how my class rankings are. I include the upside grade in there.
Yep.
Who would be next for you? So we have Deion Colsey and Jaden Thomas from 2021 class. There's no one else in 2022. And then 23, we have all the 3 kids that they have committed in this class. So who would be your next guy on the list? And I'm trying to think in my head. I've made predictions on who I think your picks are going to be, but I'm curious to see who you're going to have.
So this one becomes a battle between Braylon James and Deion Colsey for me.
Okay.
I think I would go Deion Colsey and then Braylon James. I think would be my next 2.
Tell me why.
I think that I think there's just a slightly higher upside with Deion Colsey if he hits. Just the size profile coupled with everything. I mean, Braylon, and this is picking a Lamborghini or a Maserati right now, right? Because both are extremely difficult. But I guess that just a little more added size on Colsey if he hits. I guess I would just defer to him.
I'm with you. That's where I have mine too. Like I said, 3 to 5 is like almost a coin flip for me. Like there's literally not an answer that you could give me that doesn't include Colsey, James, or Jaden Greathouse that I would say, no, dude, sorry, you're wrong. Right? You give me any one of those 3 at number 3, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I got you. I don't feel that way today, but next Tuesday I may change my mind and I may agree with you. I mean, it's literally that close. So then
perfect segue is that Jaden Greathouse is next on my list after Braylon James. So
which I assumed, right? And then 6 and 7.
6 and 7, I would
between
go
Jaden Thomas in 2021 and Rico Flores in 2023.
I would go Jaden Thomas and then Rico Flores. That would be my list. I think Jaden, just with the additional size he has and some positional, like alignment flexibility, just kind of edges out.
I think when healthy, here's my big thing. If Jaden Thomas was healthy, I think he'd be in more of a conversation for being higher than he would be being lower.
Sure.
And that's the thing, is he wasn't healthy as a senior, and he wasn't healthy most of his freshman year. He's a good football player. But yes, and then Rico Flores 7. And any group of 7 receivers that has Rico Flores dead last is a pretty darn good group of receivers.
100%.
There's no doubt about that. So basically our only difference is at 1 and 2.
Yes.
We
Sounds
just
like
flipped
it.
1 and 2. We're on
Yep.
the same page. Now, you ask me this question next week, and I may have Jaden Greathouse number 3. I mean, again, it's that close, and it's really good football players in that
I'm
group.
putting Jaden Greathouse at number 1 next time. So we'll
Okay.
get there.
Then I'll be like, all right, Ryan's got to go. He had stuff to do. He's got to get out of here. Good question, Patrick. Really appreciate that. We have a super chat from Hunter. I haven't seen you in a long time, since last year's Notre Dame Cincinnati game, I think, Hunter. Good to see you back. Hey, Bearcats fan here. Just wondering what your expectations for Coach Freeman's first season as head coach are. Rooting for y'all. Appreciate that, Hunter.
Mm-hmm.
Ryan, we did a show on this a couple weeks ago. I mean, my expectation is that Notre Dame goes into the month of November competing for a spot in the college football playoff. I'm sorry, that's just
anything less is a letdown, in my opinion. Anything less is a
Yeah.
letdown. I could not agree
Yeah.
more. You're competing for national championships and playoff berths. Like you're competing for that right now.
I mean, the floor for this football team should be 10-2. And I know there's a lot of BKPTSD people out there, but the reality is this team should be 10-2 or better. That's just that's where it should be. This is a far better team than it was last year. Just for even if the same coaches were coming back,
right?
I'd be saying the same thing. This is going to be a far better football team than it was last year because the talent level to me is so much better. Because you have a lot of guys coming back, you have a lot of rising sophomores that are going to be much better this year, and they were key players last year. It's almost kind of like there's some guys where it's like the coaching can't even screw that up.
Right.
Like, honestly, like I'd be like, you can't screw up Alton Fisher. You can't. You can't screw those two guys up. So I think 10-2 floor for me is where I'm at. And as I said, you should be entering the month of November with a chance with no more than one loss. If you have more than one loss going to November, this team was disappointing. We have a super sticker from John Banco. John, thank you very, very, very much for that. John also earlier asked a question, and we'll get to that too, but I wanted to thank you for your super sticker. Appreciate that. John Banco says, do you feel that that difference in player development by this staff will be stark as recruiting, and how dramatically will that expand offensive firepower? No, I don't think it'll be quite that stark. And the reason I say is because the difference in recruiting was so much. It's easier to have an immediate impact when you're just talking about recruiting than it is to, turn a guy that's been coached poorly for 3 years into a master technician. That's hard to do. We've seen this in the past where guys struggle, or maybe they're not developed well, and then they transfer somewhere and they don't have that jump, even though the coaching is better, because you've had so many bad habits kind of instilled that you got to break. And sometimes it can take longer to break those than just a spring and a fall. So I don't think it'll be as stark. Plus, we're talking about Notre Dame going from, having a 6 to 9 recruiting year on their best year, more so 10 to 12, to having a number 1 ranked class. So that's pretty stark. But I think the baseline for the roster is a little higher than what the baseline was for typical recruiting classes at Notre Dame. So that's part of it too. Will expand the offensive firepower? Now that is the thing that I will say. Yes, I think that is where we will see the biggest difference if the coaching is as good as we think it is. If this coaching is, if they improve the coaching the way that they've improved the recruiting, the biggest difference we'll see will be on offense, in my opinion.
Is that strictly just based upon the fundamentals of playing each position, or you think from a just usage perspective as well, like
all of it
in the game plan?
All of it. I think it goes together.
Sure.
I think the improved fundamentals give you a chance to be improved when it comes to all the other aspects of it, right? Like, when we talk about the bowl game, we say, well, Tommy Rees didn't make any adjustments. Well, yeah, he did, but they just didn't work because the offensive line couldn't execute those things, right?
Sure.
It's the same thing here. You're in a situation where if the offensive line plays better, fundamentally sound football, what does that mean, Ryan? It means the talent takes over.
Right.
Well, once the talent takes over, you're pretty good. I mean, that was the thing is Harry Heastand didn't turn Quentin Nelson into a great player. He from just because from a guy that didn't have talent, he took a guy with great talent and turned him into a great player. Sure. My point is he didn't take a guy that was just an okay talent and turn him into a great player. Micah McGlinchey had great talent for college. Alex Bars was a talented kid. And so he was able to maximize that. So to me, the talent is there. That's the thing. You could have the greatest coaching in the country. and at best, the best you can be is 8-4 if you don't have talent, right? Like
Sure.
there's an expression everybody uses, oh, it's the Jimmies and Joes, not the X's and O's. And I've always hated that expression because it's so false. But the morsel of truth to it is X's and O's can only take you so far.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that's not discussed enough is, but talent can also only take you so far. And you need both. And in the past, I felt like they were, and when I think X's and O's, I think the development, the coaching, and all that as well, Ryan.
Yep.
The coaching has been the thing that's held this team back, not the talent. And I think that's where I disagree with a lot of people. Because how many times, the NFL draft, there's been several Notre Dame players that have gone in the NFL draft undrafted that become starters in the NFL. That's happened several times in recent years.
Yeah.
Romeo Guara being one of the earlier ones. And then, Matthias Farley was that guy. He became an NFL starter for a year for the Colts. You look at Brock Wright last year, stepping into a starting lineup. Tommy Kramer stepped into the starting lineup last year for the Lions as well. So because I think that guys just weren't prepared to play to their full potential, and there were some injuries and other factors for certain guys.
Sure.
But I feel like this team they did not get the most out of this team's talent and production potential. And I think the biggest difference has been on offense. Because I'll be honest with you, I think the talent on offense has been better than the talent on defense top to bottom the last 3 years. I think the difference is the defense was coached a lot better.
That's fair.
I think they've wasted a lot of talent on offense in the last several years, a lot. And, and I think that's going to change. And so I think that's where we're going to see a big jump is offensively. Now, will that mean, 45 points a game? I'm not saying that. I don't think that'll be the case.
That's what I heard.
Right. But do I think it'll be that they can now compete with the big boys in those games? Yes. So if Notre Dame scores 39 points a game this year or 40 points a game this year, they score 17 against Ohio State, 13 against Clemson, but score 69 against UNLV and 56 against Syracuse and 49 against Stanford. And right. I mean, then you're not any better. It just means you're dominating the crap teams even more than you dominated the crap teams before. It's more about, can you score when you play the best teams? Can you score on BYU the way you should? Can you score on North Carolina the way you should? Or do you just kind of uglily beat them 31-17 on the road like you did last time, when you really should have hung 41 on them if you're playing to your potential? I think those are the different questions. Can you get over 20 against this Clemson defense? A great offense should be able to get over 20 against this Clemson defense. Now, is that going to be easy? Heck no. You got to play at a pretty high level to get over 20 against this Clemson defense. But teams did it last year. NC State did it, right? And they were pretty good defense last year too. So that's kind of, for me, Ryan, where I'm at with that. So, yes, I think it'll be stark, but not to the degree that the recruiting is, because it's just a different type of thing. It's just, there's a lot more to it because with recruiting, you're basically starting at a baseline. It's just empty. With players, you're having to deal with any issues that have been there in the past, deprogramming bad habits. You don't have to deprogram exactly. And that's the difference for me.
For sure.
David Lowe asked Ryan, he goes, why didn't Notre Dame go for a transfer portal receiver?
They gave some guys looks, right? Like we talked about Charlie Jones, who ended up at Purdue, right? For the Iowa transfer. It just, one, didn't make sense, if we're being completely honest. Like, that's just the point blank to it. And Notre Dame is tight on scholarship offers right now. Like, they're in a tough spot as far as the numbers game, and the fits that were out there that they had some interest in just didn't make sense for them. So,
right. For me, it's also, I think that the numbers aspect of it was there too. I think there's also a lot of Notre Dame fans look at all these undergraduate receivers that are going from place to place, and people talk about it's hard for Notre Dame to get top recruits into college, and I've said that's nonsense. Like, this is a well-known reality in college recruiting. It is a lot harder to get into Stanford than it is Notre Dame. It's a lot harder to stick it and be successful at Notre Dame than it is at Stanford for football players. That's what I've been told for years. Now, having said that, that's not true when it comes to transfers. Notre Dame is an incredibly hard place to get an undergraduate transfer to. They had to work hard to get Brandon Joseph there, and he is from Northwestern. The baseball team had a kid, I was told, had a kid from Harvard that was trying to transfer, and they wouldn't take him. because it's not the admissions department. It's the deans of the different academics say, well, this kid's going to come here. He has to have taken this, and this. And they're the ones that sign off on transfers. So it's been very challenging to get that done. And that's something Notre Dame's need to address. But for now, that's just not the reality of it. So there were some guys they would have gladly taken a look at if they were interested. But they either A, weren't interested because Notre Dame wasn't promising them things that, like in Alabama, was basically promising, guys, you're going to come here and start because who else is going to start, right? NIL promises were made to Jordan Addison. Notre Dame wasn't doing all that. And Notre Dame wasn't promising playing. You have to come here and earn it. And that's just kind of how they are. And promising a kid something, even if you know he's going to play, it goes against everything Marcus Freeman's trying to build of you're going to come here and compete.
Right.
And it's just, I think that was a big part of what went into it as well. But there just weren't nearly as many options as people think. And those options in most instances would have not have been needle movers. Charlie Jones would have been a nice pickup, but more so for special teams and wide receiver, in my opinion.
Just some depth at receiver.
Right.
100%.
Right. Yep. Exactly. YouTube user Salty Virginia Peanuts. I just love that they have him there as YouTube user. Do you have a status report on Billy Strouth? From what I'm told, he's back to working out and moving around really well and all that. So he should be good to go. I don't know if it's going to be at the beginning of fall camp. I don't have an answer to that, but I'm told he's going to be good to go for the fall. I don't know if that means September or if he's good to go now. I'm not quite sure on that, but I was told he's good to go for the fall. And looking really good. And we've seen some of the videos that they've had of the team working out. He's been out there running and a part of those sprints and workouts. So I think that only adds to kind of the fact that he is in good shape.
That's good.
Brian, Irish Mojo 25. Brian and Ryan, can you give your opinion on who the starting O and starting D will be for the Ohio State game?
Oh, we're going through 22 positions right now?
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing? What we're about to do?
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, offensively, Ryan, I'll say who I think, and you tell me if you would go with somebody different.
Sure.
Quarterback, Tyler Buckner.
Yep.
Running back, Chris Tyree, with him and Audric Estime being part of a rotation.
Sure.
Wide receiver, I think it's going to be – this is the one that will be a little bit interesting. I feel that Braden Lindsay and Lorenzo Styles will both be starters.
Sure.
I have doubts about whether or not Avery Davis is going to be healthy for the opener. If he's healthy, then I think Lorenzo Styles starts in the boundary. If Davis is not healthy, and I don't expect him to be healthy, that's just my opinion. That's my guess on some things I've heard. It's not intel. It's not giving the kids injury stuff away. It's just me speculating on what I think. I'm gonna go with Deion Colesy starting in the boundary, or I could see them starting in 12 personnel and just having Braden and I think if Avery's out, I think we'll see a lot more 12 personnel from Notre Dame, where Mayer's moved around a lot. And then you get into, well, then who's the second tight end? And I'm just going to say it right now, don't sleep on Kane Barong being that second tight end at this point in time. So, I mean, I was told he has tied Mayer twice in some of where they do the 225 max outs, twice he has tied Mayer for the most at the tight end position.
He's got shorter arms. Not impressed.
Sure. Whatever you say, Ryan. Offensive line left to right. Did you see the video on Twitter the other day? That guy that put up like 30-some bench reps, and they're like, everybody's like, oh, this is a great thing. And it's like half of them, he's like barely even getting to like, it's like, come on, man. Like 3 of those count at the combine. You know what I mean?
That was like Kurt Hinish at the pro day.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Offensive line left to right, Alt, Patterson, Carell, Lugg, and Fisher.
Agree. Yep.
Defensive line wise, Foskey Viper, Jason Adamula 3 technique, Howard Cross nose with Jacob Lacey playing a bunch there as well. Riley Mills is the big end. And then Justin Adamula is sort of your super sub type of guy. He's going to play a bunch. He'll play some strong, he'll play some Viper, he'll play a lot of nickel. He'll play a ton as well. I think Jacob Lacey will play a ton as well. Linebacker, Rover, Jack Kaiser, Mike, JD Bertrand, Will, Maris Lilfow. How are we doing so far?
Agree all
Secondary will be Cam Hart and Clarence Lewis at corner. Tariq Bracey will be part of a 3-man rotation and will also be the nickel. This is just where I see it right now. And then safety, it'll be Brandon Joseph and Ramon Henderson as of right now is where I would project. I do think there will be a battle for that second safety spot at this point in time. I do.
For what we know now, though, I agree with you. For what we know now.
Yep. So. Rob Lobo 123 says, who do you guys expect to be the surprise players for Ohio State? So are you talking about the surprise? I guess, Rob, before we answer, I did want to get to this so I could have you follow up. Are you asking for do we think are going to be the surprise Notre Dame players when they play Ohio State? Or are you asking us to speak about Ohio State? Who do we think are surprise players for Ohio State? The Ohio State team.
I took it as surprise players to kind of have a big game against Ohio State is what I took it as.
I'm going to give Rob a couple minutes to respond to that and follow up. And so we will come back to that. And if he doesn't, then we'll just go with the angle that you said, Ryan, because that's what I thought it was as well. But I just wanted to give him a chance because it would take a completely different direction depending on what he says.
100%. Yeah, we
did have a super. Yeah, exactly. We did have a super sticker from Travis. Thank you, Travis, for that very, very much. Ed asks, question, Brian. Last year, we struggled tackling with limits on contact and practice these days. How do you improve tackling? Positioning is the biggest one, Ryan. I mean, teaching guys to being proper position and proper angles. So it's a fundamental thing. I also think a lot of older coaches need to get more creative with how they work on tackling. You know, so like there were times when, you know, when I coached one for 2 years on an option offense. And so a big part of that is cut blocking. And I thought it was stupid for us to every day be sending those guys' shoulders into the grounds. So I'd get mats out. I'd get like the long jump mat and we'd work on, you know, cut blocking that way. Or we'd put like a pad down and we'd work on it that way. There's different things you can do in order to sort of eliminate the wear and tear or the pounding on the head that people are worried about and still teach tackling. I do think you need to do more tackling in fall camp. So that way you don't have to do as much in fall practices when you get into the season.
Sure.
So I think that's a part of it, but I think a big part of it is just there's a lot you can do in practice to get guys in position where you're focusing on being in proper position. And then you can compartmentalize a little bit and say, okay, here now we're going to work on fundamentals of tackling. Sure. I think is another thing. And now where it's not full on tackling, but if you work enough on those two things, they end up kind of going together when you get into those live situations. 100%. So yes, I do think that is a big part. And get better players.
Yeah. Well,
that's the last piece. Get better players.
Get longer players, right? That have bigger tackle radiuses. I mean, honestly though, but yeah, I mean, you can add on, you know, you can always add in a form tackle to the end of almost every drill you do, right? And then you could, you know, have an emphasis on tackle circuits where you don't have to have full contact. It's just more about body positioning, like you said, and taking proper angles and head on the right side and all that type of stuff. So I agree completely.
Yep. All right. David Lowe, this is for you, Ryan. David says, what are our chances on landing Samuel Mpemba?
Look, I think that the longer it goes, the less the chance gets, and we know it's going to go into the fall now. So I was probably at one point maybe a 6.5 with this one. If I'm doing a confidence meter, I would say I'm like a 5 right now because there's just so much competition for him. You know, I think Notre Dame's going to be in it until the end. I mean, he's in his top 7 right now, right? But I ultimately think that it's going to be a tough pull. But I think Notre Dame's in it. With how this one's playing out, I just get less confident as it kind of goes.
Yeah, I want to see him commit to going through the fall. That would be the thing for me. I think, I have a lot of thoughts on that. I'm going to hold off on to him until we see how Notre Dame closes out this summer, because I think that's going to factor into it as well. Meaning, if they get all the players that we think they're going to get, he's it. That's the board. Yeah. That's your 2023 board.
That's where all the attention goes now, right? Like, hey, every coach is calling you every single day.
Exactly. And that increases your chances. If you're having to expand the board because you had some misses, then, you know, it's a little different deal.
100%.
Irish Mojo 25 says, what would you consider a breakout year for Tyler Buchner? For me, it's about at least 2,800 yards, around 60% completion percentage, and at least 500 yards rushing. To me, would be a breakout year. I mean, you're talking about a kid who's not played a ton. I think that would be a breakout year for me. Does that mean breakout the same way in which C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young broke out last year? No. Is it more similar to what Ryan Van Dyke did last year? Or excuse me, Tyler Van Dyke did last year for Miami?
Ryan is a great name, though.
Yes.
Great name.
Tyler Van Dyke did last year. That's a lot more what I think a breakout looks like. It's kind of like Trevor Lawrence as a freshman. Like, okay, because he did that doesn't mean that every freshman has to do that moving forward or he's a bust. No, most guys, a breakout doesn't include you threw for 4,800 yards and won the Heisman as your redshirt freshman at Alabama. A more traditional breakout is what we saw from Tyler Van Dyke, about 3,000 yards total offense, took over in about the third game. He got more passing yards. Well, they were losing a lot more too and played some bad teams. So yeah, I think minimum 2,800 yards passing, minimum 500 yards rushing, minimum 35 total touchdowns, minimum are the numbers that he has to get to those or some balance of. So if he ends up becoming a beast thrower and he's 3,300 yards rush throwing and he's only 300 yards passing, cool. If he runs for 800 and only throws for 2,600 and he's dynamic at it, cool. Right. But those are the numbers I look at, Ryan. Anything, would you change those anywhere?
I was going to say 3,500 total yards. So just a little bit higher than you said. I think you said like 2,800 passing, 500 rushing at minimum.
Yeah,
So like
3,300.
Yeah. So I would say 3,500, somewhere in that ballpark. And then touchdowns is interesting because obviously we're doing total touchdowns. So I'd say your 35 number is a pretty realistic one, right? Like
minimum.
25 touchdown passes, 10 rushing, like
or 28 and 7, 30
Sure.
and 5, right?
Yeah, sure.
Minimum is the numbers on those. I want to make sure that I emphasize those. Part of the reason I'm at 3,300 is because I think there's going to be some really big blowouts this year. There's some teams in the schedule that are just flat awful. I mean, just awful.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, they're just, they're, and there's other teams. If Notre Dame's the team we think they are, he's not going to be playing 4 quarters against Marshall. He's not going to be playing 4 quarters against Cal or Stanford or Navy or UNLV or Syracuse. I mean, there's going to be games like that. And that just to me are going to kind of tamp the numbers down a little bit because part of it is they're going to, other people are going to be running for big plays in that.
Sure.
Here's an interesting one from Nick Duda. Based on your recent conversations about past teams, I've been rewatching games from Josh Adams in 15 to 17. What kind of blocking scheme open up those gaping holes? How similar will that be with Harry Hiestand back? So depends. The 2 main plays, there were really 3 concepts that were most effective for Notre Dame in that 2017 season. Really 3 plays that became like the big plays for Notre Dame. Inside zone was one, right? So if you think of the long 80-plus yard touchdown against USC, that was just inside zone. It was a zone read look where Brandon Wimbush kind of pulls it, or fakes a pull, and that kind of occupied people. And then Alex Bars just muscles a guy into the A gap, and Josh cuts right into the B gap for a long play. They had a lot of success that year with buck sweep. They had a 70-plus yard touchdown against North Carolina to the left on the buck sweep. In that win. So they had a couple big plays off the buck sweep. I think they also had about a 60-yard touchdown run against Miami of Ohio off of a buck sweep the opposite direction. But a lot of those were inside zone was one, but those 2, and then also counter. They had some big plays off the counter play. And they going back to 2015, if you remember, Ryan, you remember that long touchdown run they had against Stanford in 2015? That was off counter, just counter tray to the right and, just blew it open. And Steve Elmer had a really good block. Q had a really nice kick out block. And then Adams goes vertical, cuts it all the way back for a touchdown. Those are the 3 plays that were primarily the big drivers of success. I think we will see all those concepts with Harry back. But another concept we're going to see more of is Notre Dame is adding a lot more duo into their run concepts now, which is something a lot more teams are going to. It's going to look a lot like zone to the naked eye, but it's definitely different. And so we may do a video on that to put on the premium message board here to kind of tell people the difference. But it's just a downhill run, basically, that we'll see some success on. And you can run read off of it. You can use RPO off of it, but it's also a run that you can just call. You don't need to protect an edge, and I mean it's kind of designed to protect an edge with the blocking scheme where you don't need to have the read zone concepts into it. So I think we'll see more of that this year as well. But those will be buck sweep, I think we'll see. Obviously, the inside zone with reads off of it, we'll see. And then, of course, we'll see counter. Those will be the concepts we see. And I think counter is the play we're probably going to see the most improved success with. That was a big play for Notre Dame in 2020. If you remember the Chris Tyree touchdown running against Florida State, that was counter. I mean, just patient, let it break open, just bam, explode vertically. So I think those will be 3 of the 4 concepts we'll see a ton of, in my opinion, this year.
I love duo, by the way. Duo.
We'll have to have a fun little talk, you and I, about that play, because that's something a lot of people are turning to, and obviously had a fun, interesting conversation with somebody about that the other day. and just kind of learning more about that concept and different things like that. So, all right, here we go. We got several offensive line questions, so I love these. Salty Virginia Peanuts, which member of the offensive line is, by personality, most receptive to Harry Hiestan's coaching? If not Joe Alt, how receptive is Joe? I can't speak to Joe specifically, Ryan, because I don't know Joe. I would imagine he would take well to it because of who his dad is and the fact he played it under Kirk Ferentz and played in the NFL. Who is the most receptive to Harry Hiestan's coaching? I mean, I couldn't tell you if there's one guy. I think they've all kind of taken to it pretty well from what I've been told. I would say that the biggest question mark I have is Blake Fisher, just because I always have question marks about how your most talented guy reacts well to new coaches, and especially someone who didn't recruit him. But a lot of the players that Notre Dame has were actually recruited by Harry Hiestand, at least for a time. Zeke Correll was initially recruited by Harry Hiestand. Andrew Gristoffic was initially recruited by Harry Hiestand. You look at, obviously, Josh Lugg. So 3 of your starters potentially could be guys that Harry had a role in recruiting. At least 2 had some role in recruiting. He didn't recruit Jarrett Patterson. So, but I think they're all going to take to it. And I don't think we should underestimate Jarrett Patterson's receptiveness to it either, Ryan, because that's why he came back. I think a big
100%.
part of the reason Jarrett Patterson came back, because you've said this, he's probably a second-round pick at worst last year if he comes out, right? You know, so I think a big reason he came back was he wanted to be coached by Harry. So I don't know if there's one guy, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know if there's one guy. One guy that did pop in my head was Zeke Correll, just because I mean, everything we've heard, the early reviews, is that he really is turning everything on in spring, right? So obviously he must be taking to it pretty well, right? Just, I mean, that's kind of a easy thing to kind of parallel there. But I also think that he's kind of got that like tough guy persona to him too, right? Like I think that I don't think Zeke Correll shies away from hard work. So, but to your point, I don't think anybody in that room really shies away from hard work. I think it's a really, really tough group in general, to be honest. So
good stuff. More offensive line. Irish Chi-Town. Brian, what was Coach Hiestan's best offensive line? This is a great one, and I'm going to surprise you with this. His best offensive line, in my opinion, was 2015. The reason because I think that was the best all-around offensive line. I don't think the 2017 offensive line was quite as good in pass pro, mainly because I don't think Mike McGlinchey was great in pass pro against the better edge rushers. And so I'm gonna go 2015. I think 2015, when you consider all the things that kind of went through, that offensive line had the most adversity to face. I think the 2017 was by far the best run blocking offensive line, by far. Yeah. But I think 2015 had more overall left to right talent. And 2015 also, to me, was the better overall pass blocking unit, in my view.
2015, a lot of NFL teams would take that offensive line.
Yes.
From that 2015 team and be like, yup, would like that.
Right. If Steve Elmer would have decided to stick with football, you'd be talking probably about 5 guys that were starters in the NFL that would be there now. Yes.
100%.
Yes. And you had a first-round pick at left tackle, a first-round pick at left guard, second-round pick at center.
Who started a bunch of games.
Elmer was a 3-year starter at Notre Dame and left after his junior year, and then you had a first-round pick at right tackle. And I would argue the 2015 was Mike McGlinchey's best year.
It's fair.
He was a dominant right tackle in 2015. Like, he was really good in 2017, but he was really good in 2015, in my opinion. So another example of just them wasting just a really loaded team. Anyway, all right, let's see here. Got some more. Jay Henry says, Brian and Ryan, how does Caleb Beasley compare to Christian Gray, and who's the better prospect? So let's look at two ways I want you to answer that question, Ryan, and I'll give my opinion too. Who's the better prospect right now with where they are right now, and who was the better prospect as a sophomore?
Well, I mean, yeah, that makes it so tough. I mean, right now, I guess I would go Christian Gray with all things that we know right this second. I mean, Christian Gray has kind of an advanced feel to him. I will say, to your second part of your question, though, Brian, projecting forward to what I think Caleb Beasley and Christian Gray are going to be as seniors, I would probably defer to Caleb Beasley in that situation, because I think Caleb's just a little more of a difference maker athletically, right? Like, I think he's got a little bit of a higher ceiling, but right now, again, you're comparing a guy that's about to be a senior to a guy that just finished up a sophomore year. So it would be Christian Gray now, but I think it's going to be Caleb Beasley.
I think it's a lot closer.
Mm-hmm.
I think Caleb Beasley's really good. And I can't believe he's not ranked higher. I don't get it. I think he's stronger. I think Christian's a little bit more fluid. I think Caleb's a little bit more explosive. I think Christian has a little bit better long speed. I think Caleb has a little bit more explosiveness. They're very different players in a lot of ways, in my opinion. Yep. But I'd probably go with Christian right now based on where they are both right now, because the difference between a high school sophomore and a high school junior is a lot different than a college sophomore to a college junior.
Sure.
Whereas when they're college sophomore and junior, they're both more developed and kind of, it's more technical and weight room strength, as opposed to just the physical growth that kids go through from their sophomore to junior seasons. So yes, that's a good question. Really good question. I like that, Jay. Thank you. Benjamin McCarthy, if Tommy stays in the booth this season, who will call plays on the sideline? Who would you like to see? I don't care. And so no one on the sideline is calling plays. I just want to make sure people understand the language, because I don't think you mean this, Benjamin, but the way it's written, the only person that calls plays is Tommy Rees. Right. The people on the field signal in what Tommy Rees is calling. Yep. I think I feel like the focus that they had last year, it was some weird storyline about Lance Taylor's role of calling plays in the field, was more of just a weird thing that the Notre Dame people talked about to give people something to write about. It's no different than what any other team does. You have a coach on there that's designated as the guy that talks to the players when they come off the field, because the play caller's up in the booth. And that everyone does that. That's not unique, but it became a story at Notre Dame last year because I don't know, why do half the things become stories and Notre Dame become stories? Like all of a sudden within a week, everyone seems to be talking about it. If Notre Dame goes 11-1, this is the best coaching job of Brian Kelly's career. Just randomly, all of a sudden, everybody starts talking about that, right? I don't know why it became a thing. And NBC does it, they promote it because they need something, I guess, to talk about, since they weren't diving into the analysis the way they did under Mayock. But honestly, Benjamin, it doesn't matter. Whoever is the best communicator. I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, though, what I care more about is just someone who's going to relay what Tommy Rees says. And whether that's Dylan McCullough or Chancey Stuckey or Jared Parker, I don't care. And there's Harry's going to talk to the O-line and the other person's going to talk to others, and that's just kind of how it's going to go. So, but who's going to call plays on the sideline? It's the people that signal in plays have always been the quarterbacks. That's who it's always been. Like the thing with Lance Taylor last year, that was just more of he would be the guy that would talk to the offense when they'd come to the sidelines. He wasn't calling in plays, though. The quarterbacks are the ones that signal in plays, and they usually have three. Two of them are usually live. So, one guy's calling formation, and then only one of them has the play call. Another one is oftentimes signaling in like some sort of personnel grouping or formation or alignment. And then there's always usually at least one dummy call. So, meaning you're trying to not let the defense know who's actually signaling in so they can kind of get an idea of who you're watching. So, yeah.
I never heard that Lance Taylor thing before. That's interesting.
Yeah. Talked about it a lot last year. It's like, okay.
Sounds like fun.
Yeah. Wade Garrett's being that guy. I love it a little bit. Sitting on the beach in Kauai. I don't know how. I think that's the way to say it. I'm not sure. Kauai. There you go. That's in Hawaii. Watching the show. No questions. Just bragging. Go Irish. I love it. I love it. Good one, Wade. We're all jealous. Irish Chi-Town says, Brian, do you think Tommy will call any run options with Tyler? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Quite a few.
Yep. Here's an interesting one I like, Ryan. Colonel Clink's Monocle says, Brian and Ryan, by the end of the season, which three units will have improved the most compared to where they were last year? I think we both know who number one is.
Yeah. Offensive line would be number one, right? We're going there. Okay. Offensive line would be number one. Wide receiver would be number two for me. And number three.
It's corner for me.
Corner for you?
Really just secondary in general.
Yeah.
I think secondary is going to be a lot better by season's end, by the end of the season.
Yeah.
I think the secondary is going to be a lot better because last year you had Xavier Watts made a transition to secondary in the middle of the season.
Right.
I mean, as late as North Carolina, Ramon Henderson was playing corner. So you moved him out when Kyle Hamilton got hurt. Cam Hart was in his first year as a starter. Tariq Bracy was kind of still rebounding from his kind of collapse in 2020. So I think by the end of the year, the secondary is going to be pretty good. Will it be enough to beat Ohio State? That I don't know. But I'm a lot more confident against this secondary holding up against USC than I am against Ohio State, just because of the experience that they're going to get. So that's my third. Who would your third be?
I was wrestling between cornerback and linebacker. Linebacker was the other one that I wanted to mention because you're getting Maris Loifau back, which I think is going to be a huge bonus. You're moving J.D. Bertrand into a position that I think is more natural for him at Mike potentially. You have guys like Junior Tuihalamaka and the freshmen that are now coming in. So I think you're going to make a lot more plays on the second level this year than you did last year.
I think we could see – I think that what I'll say is this. I would not be shocked if by the end of the year, the group that makes the biggest jump in production of groups that we can measure production is linebackers. I think you could be right on that. Yep, right on that. It's a good one. And I think that's debatable. I would not sit there like, nope, it's secondary, man. It's got to be – I think it's debatable on who's going to be a big jump. Hopefully, we're having that debate at the end of the year.
I hope so, too.
That would be a good thing. ND Mac, this is a great question. On the topic, do you think they carry the extra year for COVID too long? Feels like it's punishing high school kids that possibly lost a year of high school football and are now behind guys more mature in 5th and 6th years. I'll say the mistake that I think they made was not expanding the rosters beyond that first year afterwards.
Agree.
So, like in 2021, last year, there was unlimited scholarships, and now they're just immediately back to 85. I think that's a mistake. I understand where you're saying, I don't think it's high school kids behind those. I think what's happened is a lot of high school kids didn't get scholarships they would have otherwise gotten because teams were bringing back 6th-year and 5th-year guys they wouldn't have otherwise brought back, which meant because you're back to 85, you had to make some tough decisions about high school kids. And so I think that was the mistake they made. They should have gradually worked it back to 85. And like, to me, I would say at the earliest next year is when you should have gone back to 85. And I think you could have made a case for 95 this year, 90 next year, and 85 the next. But I also understand that there would have been some teams that have abused the heck out of that 95 for this year. Sure. Especially teams that don't have guaranteed 4-year scholarships like the SEC, which I don't believe they have 4-year guaranteed scholarships. And even the ones that they do, they chase kids off all the time. So I understand it, but it definitely should have at least been 2023 before you went back to 85. I think that was a big mistake.
I agree with the roster. I think the roster expansion is the biggest thing for me. I think that they should have allowed the unlimited scholarships because, I mean, from my perspective, from an NFL draft realm for a second, I talked about this a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Avery Davis, Braden Lindsay, evaluation. The NFL draft last year had 2,100 players in it, which was up from 650 the year before. So I think that the point of that is that I think it's going to correct itself pretty quickly. Like, I don't think this logjam is going to be to the level that it has been over the last, last year or so. So I think it's going to correct itself pretty quickly. But to Brian's point, not keeping it at unlimited scholarship has punished a lot of high schools. Right. So I think the bigger impact is that than the actual extra COVID year, if that makes sense.
I don't know if I would have kept it unlimited for the second year, like 2022. But I would have had it more than 85.
Like it's 90 or something.
Ideally, I probably would have gone like unlimited 95, 90, 85 in 2024. But I also think that would have meant a lot of, that would have made it, the teams would have taken advantage of that. So I'd have been okay going 90 and then back to 85. But some sort of eventually working down to 85 would have been more ideal, in my opinion. Absolutely would have been more ideal. It's a good question, ND Mac. Coach Bent 574. Can you rank the last timers based on lack of production due strictly to lack of coaching? So, who are the guys that to me? So basically, I'm taking this, Ryan. We're going to rank them first to last on lack of production based on lack of coaching. I will say I'm putting Kevin Bauman at the bottom of my list because I don't think the tight end coaching was a problem. I think John McNulty was at the very least a solid tight ends coach.
And you also had dudes in front of him, right? So it's not like he's just been in a room and it's just
he's been injured a lot, right? It's like, oh, this guy would have been so good if he would have coached better. Like, no, he was buried behind talented players. He's been banged up a lot. I think that's like running back. I'm not blaming running back coaching for why Chris Tyree didn't have a good year last year. I think Lance Taylor was a good football coach. The O-line stunk, and Chris was banged up and other factors like that. Receiver, different story. So, to me, lack of success based on lack of production of the 5. I mean, it's Braden Lindsay number 1.
Sure.
Due to lack of coaching. I'd probably go Josh Lugg number 2, because I count part of that is they kept moving him to places he shouldn't have played. That's a coaching decision.
Sure.
They should have they flat out should have moved Robert Hainsey to center in 2020 and let Josh play tackle. Robert offered, he wanted to do it, but they decided not to. So instead they put Josh Lugg at center, which was really stupid. If we're going to be honest about it, I'd go him number 1. I'd go Bauman number 5.
Mm-hmm.
I'd probably Lindsay 1, Lugg 2.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely Kristofic 3 for me, and then Wilkins 4. Yeah, would be my order. Bauman 5. Yeah.
I would be the same. I think I think I would be.
You can make a case for moving Kristofic up 1.
I know 2 and 3 was the ones that I was thinking, like, do I want to flip? But I think, to your point, the fact that Josh has also been like just jockeyed in so many different directions, right? Like, it positionally, I think has really hurt his growth a lot. So,
yep, agree. All right, we got a few more here before we wrap up. Connor O'Doherty, do you guys think that Braden Lindsay can become a 1,000-yard receiver, best case scenario? I know you guys talked about him not necessarily being that guy, but being dynamic nonetheless. But who knows? I think he can. Yeah, I think he can. Willie, I'm not predicting that, but here's the way I look at it. Number 1, he doesn't need 70 catches to get to 1,000 yards, number 1. Number 2, if Michael Mayer is what we think he will be and Lorenzo Styles is what we think he could be, there's a chance that Braden Lindsay is going to have a lot of 3-catch, 120-yard games. Yeah. And Notre Dame's going to play at least 13 games. 1,000 yards nowadays is not like what it was back in the day. I mean, right, if they only play one postseason game, he only needs to average 76.9 yards a game to get to 1,000 yards. There's going to be games Braden gets that in 2 catches. That's my thing, and then there's going to be games he gets it in 6 catches because he's going to catch a bunch of, RPOs because of it. His 1,000-yard season would have more to do with guys around him just being really good and teams just say, we're going to have to cover him one-on-one. So, I think he's capable of it. Am I going to predict it? No. But would I be shocked by it? Not really. I really would. I think Braden Lindsay's a really talented player. I do. I think right now he's probably their 3rd best pass catcher. I think the other thing is too is even if he's that guy, you're going to see running backs catch the balls. You're going to, there's just going to be different things. So I think he could be that. I do. I'm more confident he could be that guy than Ryan is. I'm just not predicting it.
Well, the last thing you said though, Brian, is the fact that I just think there's like a lot of mouths to feed. You know, like there's just a lot because Chris Tyree can do stuff in the passing game, obviously, right? Michael Mayer, no brainer. Lorenzo Styles Jr., one of the other sophomores maybe breaking out. Tobias Merriweather coming in. I just think there's a lot of mouths to feed. That's my only hesitation. It's not really a knock on the talent level of Braden Lindsay. It's just more like what's the because I know you're saying he needs a lower volume, but even then it's still a lot of guys to feed in this offense. Probably
going to need at least 50 touches to get to 1,000 yards. Especially if he's getting a lot, so I mean, but I think he's capable of it. I'm not predicting it. I think he's capable of it. And that's the thing that we have. I mean, like, look, here's an example. Ohio State in 2019, right? If you look at their season, their starting quarterback, Justin Fields, in 14 games, passed for 3,200 yards. They had 3,600 yards passing as a team. That's kind of on par with what Notre Dame has been doing in recent years in 13 games. And that season, they didn't have a single guy. Not only did they not have a single guy get to 1,000 yards, they didn't get anybody to 900 yards. Why? Because it was spread around. You had 6 guys that had at least 247 yards. You had 3 guys that had at least 500 yards. So I mean, the balls were spread around more, and to me, that's kind of how I see it being. I mean, in 2018, it's probably even better example. Dwayne Haskins that year threw for as a team, they threw for 5,100 yards. Dwayne Haskins threw for over 4,800 yards. Their leading receiver in 14 games had 1,063 yards. Again, similar thing. 4 guys had at least 669 yards. At least 8 guys had at least 200 yards receiving that year. And I think
who's the 1,000-yard receiver that year?
Paris Campbell.
Paris Campbell.
Yes. And he had it on 60. He had it on 90 catches. KJ Hill had 68 for 869. Terry McLaren had 35 for 701. Johnny Dixon went 42 for 669. so forth and so on. So I think to your point, Ryan, I think that now Notre Dame won't have as many receivers maybe catching balls potentially, but between Chris Tyree, between the tight ends, like basically in this scenario, the 90 for 163 is most likely Michael Mayer. If a Notre Dame player is going to have 90 catches for 1,000 yards, it's going to be Michael Mayer, not Braden Lindsay. And I just think with Tyler Buchner quarterback, they're not going to be a team that's going to throw for 4,000 yards this year. They're going to be more balanced, in my opinion, which is going to factor into it as well. But is he capable of it? Yes, I think he's capable of having that kind of year. That is my opinion. Mm-hmm. So let's get to. I didn't see Rob Duda follow up with the question. Okay. So let's kind of answer the question as far as breakout players for Notre Dame for the Ohio State game. My first answer is I have no idea. But I'll say this: I'm gonna answer more who I hope breaks out in that game. Mm-hmm. And the first one is Chris Tyree on offense, because I feel like if Chris Tyree can rip off a couple runs early, that makes Notre Dame's offense. And you could insert Audric Estime if you wanted to. It's more of running back being the key. Yeah. But like if Chris Tyree can kind of go into Columbus and do at the beginning of the game, kind of like what Sear Wood did on Notre Dame's first drive against Oklahoma, which is just house it 50 yards and like shut the crowd up like immediately. That would be big for Notre Dame, because then all of a sudden, if you're got to worry about Chris Tyree gashing you for a 50-yard touchdown, now all of a sudden your RPO game opens up a little bit. Now all of a sudden your Michael Mayer opens up a little bit. So and now all of a sudden you got to, Tyler Buchner's pulling one on the outside and your safeties or your overhang defender still peeking inside looking at Chris Tyree because he just housed one. Mm-hmm. So he would be one that I would say would definitely be a breakout player for me. And then my next two on offense are pick any two offensive linemen. That would be
that's
that would
where
be
I was going to go, man. My offensive guy was going to be, because I actually took it as I picked one offensive guy and one defensive guy in my head. So the defensive guy was easy. I was going to go Marisol Fowl just because, Marisol Fowl guy. I was going to pick Blake Fisher because, again, we've only seen a game and a half of Blake, or not even a half, a game and a couple series of Blake Fisher. Brian, I think that he has a chance because there's a lot of names on that Ohio State defensive line. I know they're not developed properly, but Jack Sawyer and Zach Harrison and JT, Blake Fisher has a chance to physically dominate those dudes and be like, oh, he's that guy. Like he's that dude.
Yeah, he would set a tone because their names, they weren't great. Names. It's like some Ohio State homer jumped on the site the other day. With all due respect, Archer, you got some fans that are just dumb. And I know Notre Dame does too, but I'm sorry. Growing up in Ohio State fans are just the worst. Maybe that's why you're normal because you don't live in Ohio, Archer. But like some guys like, because I made a comment in that the where we went position by position and who I thought had the advantage. And I said that, Notre Dame's 4-star non-top 100 defensive linemen have outplayed Ohio State's 5-stars. It's like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah. It's like, okay. He has no concept that Isaiah Foskey, in my opinion, had more sacks last year than Zach Harrison's had his entire career. That he had more sacks last year than their 3 5-star DNs combined. You take any of their 2 5-star defensive ends and add their sack numbers together, and they equal Justin Ademiola's total from last year. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just like the point is there's this perception that Ohio State's got these dudes, right? And I think scouts fall into that as well. Draft analysts fall that as well. And when they pop on the film and Blake Fisher's pushing around Zach Harrison or Jack Sawyer, whoever else, that'd have a big impact if that were to happen. So yes, I think that would be I think that's a pick one. And then of course the last one is you got to hope that it's Tyler Buchner. If Tyler Buchner can have a breakout, that's pretty big. Defensively, I think Maris is a good one. And I'll tell you what, if Notre Dame's going to have a chance to make a play, some secondary guy is going to step up and make a big play that you hope. And that's Brandon not named Brandon Joseph. It's not going to be Brandon Joseph.
Why can't
and it won't because they're not going to go to him in the big moment, right? That's the reality. In the big moment, they're going to pick on Ramon Henderson or Clarence Lewis or Tariq. They're not going to pick on Cam Hart. And they're not going to go at Brandon Joseph because what happened when they tried to go at Brandon Joseph in the end zone in the Big Ten championship game 2 years ago? He picked them off, right? They know who Brandon Joseph is. That's my point. And it's going to have to be another secondary guy is going to have to be that breakout. Plus, Brandon Joseph isn't a breakout player. He was an All-American 2 years ago.
He's never played for Notre Dame. So. I don't know what you're talking about. What's it like to be wrong?
And then And then Archer asks, he goes, Brian, I'll ask on the other side of it, who will be the surprise players for Ohio State against Notre Dame?
So I have a couple answers, I think, for this one.
No, and we're not going to be jerks and say people are going to be surprised at how bad CJ Stroud plays against Notre Dame. We're not going to be jerks like that. We'll try to show respect to it.
I think number one, I actually watched a little bit on defense of Steel Chambers recently, and he was a running back to linebacker convert and was actually their best linebacker last year in a very weird kind of transition there. I think Steele is going to be a good player. So I think if he takes a step up, he could be a guy, because I know he's a guy that people know, but like, I think he has a chance to step up into one of the better linebackers in college football, potentially with the talent he has. So I would go Steel Chambers. And the other one would be any other wide receiver not named Jackson Smith and Jigga, I guess.
But I don't think, would that be, like, if Marvin Harrison comes out and plays well.
Not him as much, because last time you saw him, he was a dude. But like, what if Julian Fleming breaks out, or Egbuka breaks out? Like, you know, I don't know.
Yeah.
Or Cade Stover, maybe he has a big game, and you're like, wow, they actually threw the tight ends for once. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If G. Scott, or did he I wonder if G. Scott transferred.
I think he's still there. Okay. Actually, my real answer, though, now thinking about it, is Paris Johnson moving from offensive guard to left tackle. If he has a big game against Isaiah Foskey,
sure. Okay, that would be a surprise. That'd be a surprise to me. Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Or if, like, you know, one of their guards, whoever replaces him at right guard, handles Jason Adamiola, something like that would be a surprise for me. I don't predict it, to be honest with you.
I don't predict that one at all.
I don't think it's going to happen, but I think if I were to surprise, and I don't know who it would be, I think if Ohio State's going to have a surprise player on defense during the year, it's going to be somebody that beats out one of the current linebackers. And it's going to be like, you know, like CJ Hicks takes over as a starting job as a freshman, or, you know, somebody that's been there in the past that's maybe moving around, steps in at linebacker, because their linebacker play last year was just bad. I mean, it was just bad.
Maybe it's Cody Simon.
I mean, it was not good. It was just not good. So I think that would kind of be, it would be somebody like that. It would be somebody that just isn't playing a ton. I don't think, if secondary wise, I don't think any of the safeties are going to necessarily surprise anybody. I think their corners are good players. You know, I think it wouldn't surprise anyone if they lock down Notre Dame's receivers, because the expectations for Notre Dame's receivers aren't that high.
Right.
So I think it would be if some safety or linebacker can come in and just like hang with Michael Mayer all game, I think that would be a surprise too. I just don't know who that is, because I don't think any of them can. And that's the thing, is like, we spend all this time talking about the matchup problems that Notre Dame is going to have against Ohio State, and nobody's talking about the fact that Notre Dame presents some matchup problems for Ohio State too. Sure. But I think at the end of the day, it's going to be whose matchup advantages are perform better. You know, does Notre Dame's edge outperform Ohio State's receivers, so to speak? You know, because one's going to neutralize the other. If Ohio State players are coming out there having production, you know, making quick plays and neutralize the D line, then that's going to help Ohio State in a big way. If they've got to throw vertically, but Notre Dame's putting great pressure on CJ Stroud, maybe can force him into a couple mistakes, you know, then all of a sudden the pass rush takes over. So I think it's going to be those type of things going to be fun, be the fun part of it. But look, somebody that we're not expecting is going to make an impact in that game for the winning team. Sure. And that's part of the fun thing I love about college football is that. And hopefully it's a Notre Dame guy, obviously for our sake. So let's see here. Chief Brody. Brian, do you think they will try to mix in more tempo this season? I think they better. I mean, just to me, I don't think tempo needs to be the end all be all. I'm fine being a team that's built more on, like, I wrote an article about this, Ryan, and I talked about the difference between efficiency and tempo, right? So is your focus on efficiency, meaning you're going to run 65 plays a game and average 7+ yards per play? Or is your focus on running 90 plays and being closer to 6 yards per play? Right. Which is the one you're more focused on? Now, in the perfect world, you're running 75 for 8 a play because you're a big play team that's going fast, right? I think that's what, you know, but I think a team that's built more on precision and efficiency. So it's like precision versus tempo. I think Tommy Rees wants to be more of a precision guy. He's not as concerned about going fast as he is. Let's use motions and shifts and personnel to figure out a way to isolate, get a leverage advantage, get a matchup advantage, things like that, as opposed to just forcing you to line up base defense because we're going so fast, and then we're gonna do this. That's just not who he is. He's more of a pro style guy, in my opinion, and that can work. But I always think it's good to have the ability to just come out for a team that's waiting for precision, to have the ability to just come out and say, "Hey guys, we're gonna go at them this series. We're gonna go 11 personnel, and we're just gonna go." Or even it'd be even more fun, like if a Kane Barong breaks out, if an Eli Raron breaks out, and you can go 12 personnel with one of them in the game, you can line up, and I'd go like wing, tight end, slot, and just like do a motion and just run right at them, and then immediately go tempo and spread them out, put Kane in the slot, Mayer outside, just have some fun and go right at them. Or go 11 personnel and do the same thing. I mean, being able to throw that at a team, if you do that a couple times a game in one game, you don't have to go back to it for a few more weeks to make sure the next 2-3 teams are going to be preparing for that and trying to handle that.
Yep.
And you also need to have it, Ryan, to where there's going to be those games. If you're a precision-based offense, you're going to go into some of those games where you're just off. And it's just not there. And one of the best things that you can do is to get your team going to just say, "Hey, guys, we're going to go fast this next series." And I think that can be the thing that kind of wakes you up, gets you into rhythm. And I think that's something that you have to have in your back pocket. I don't think a tempo team needs to be able to slow it down to get into a groove. They need to be able to slow it down late. But I think precision and efficiency teams need to be able to sometimes heat things up because another team has a read on them, or because they're just not getting into a groove and they need something to break them out of that sort of slump they may be in the middle of that game. So I think they need to be able to do it. So yes, I hope that they do try to mix it in, but it won't be mixed in as far as like a normal part of what they do. Right. Sure. So that's any thoughts that you want to add or disagree with or anything like that on that, Ryan?
I did a baseball analogy yesterday, right? So I'm going to stick to the baseball analogy. You don't want to be a one-pitch pitcher, right? You need a change up ready to go. So that's my thought is I don't think you can always be one style and one style only. You have to be able to have a change up, and that's where adjustments come in. That's where different styles of tempo come in. So I agree with you 100%. Especially as a guy that was a defensive coach, right? Like, when a team would switch things up and the tempo starts at a different pace, you're like, whoa, what is happening right now? You got to adjust so much quicker. So yes, I agree. I think that you need different pitches in your pitching repertoire. I think you need more tools in your toolbox than just a single tool. So
Travis with a super chat. Thank you, Travis, very much for another one of those. If you could add any non-QB to the 23 or 24 class, who would it be? So any player that's not a quarterback in the 23 or 24 class, who would it be?
That's an interesting question. I mean, personally, I would like to.
I think I know who mine is.
My first thought was, I'm still going to go with Caleb Downs. It's tough, though. But, I mean, it was between Jason Moore and Caleb Downs for me. I just think that Jason Moore plays a more important position in a vacuum. But Caleb Downs, I think, is just going to be a superstar. So that's just kind of where my mind went.
And I think that when you look at Jason Moore, as we said all along, even when we thought Notre Dame was going to get him, he was a luxury. He was a want, not a need. Caleb Downs, you don't have and the point is Tyson Ford, Aiden Gobira, Keon Keeley, Boubacar, Devin Houston, right? Brendan Vernon. You got a lot of dudes. Brandon Davis Swain, next year's class. Notre Dame's got a lot of guys. Jason Moore is outstanding. It doesn't take it at all away from how much we wanted Jason Moore, and it was a miss. The reality is it's kind of like getting Monroe Freeling. Monroe Freeling wasn't a need for a 6 offensive lineman. It was more of a want. If you get him, great. If you don't, okay, you still got a pretty darn good offensive line class. I think Caleb Downs, to your point, Ryan, is still a need, right, with where the roster is at right now. You got Peyton Bowen, and after that, there's nobody else like Peyton Bowen on the roster. Okay. Caleb Downs will give you another one. I'm still going in a different direction, though. I'm going Micah Hudson. If I could guarantee that they're going to get one guy in the next 2 years, 23 or 24, that I can guarantee right now they're going to get, that's not a quarterback, I'm going Micah Hudson.
It would have been if I was focusing more on 2024, and I know the question is 2023 or 2024, I would have went a wide receiver. I'm not sure if I would have went Wingo or Hudson, but yeah, I accept your premise. It's a very interesting one.
Yep. That would be a big one.
That kid's special, man.
Yeah.
Michael Hudson is special.
Yep.
I agree. I agree.
Last two that we're going to get to here, one's from Sean Kane. Sean says, Brian and Ryan, who on the schedule has the best secondary that Notre Dame will face this year?
Wow, that's another good one. I mean, so Ohio State has names, Brian. They haven't lived up to their names though. Like, I mean, Denzel Burke, I think, is going to be a good player. Cameron Brown's actually a better player than I thought he was. They have Ronnie Hickman. Like, there was a lot of names in Ohio State secondary. They just haven't played up to that standard at this moment. I'm trying to think, like USC, nah.
If they played Ohio State in November, I would be more willing to have that conversation of it being Ohio State.
Sure.
And they added the kid from Oklahoma State, right?
McAllister.
Yeah, they added
McAllister.
him.
Yeah. Yep.
So, to me, Clemson's not there for me, but they're at least in the conversation. They've got some question marks, I think.
Yes.
They've got some talent. The thing about Clemson is Clemson has a really good freshman secondary class coming in. Really good freshman secondary class coming in.
Yep.
So, because they lost Mario Goodrich, right?
Yeah.
BYU's got a veteran group of DBs coming back. You know who's in the conversation that a lot of people are going to laugh at me for when I say this, and it's one of the reasons I really think.
Can I guess it?
Yeah.
Boston College?
No. I think their secondary is garbage.
Oh, I mean, they got Josh DeBerry and Elijah Jones are two pretty good corners.
North Carolina.
Oh, Storm Duck and Tony Grimes.
Well, yeah, and you got Cameron Kelly, and I think that was a group. That to me, that was a group, Ryan, that was very young. Your best players were all young guys, and they were coached horribly. And I think they're going to be better coached. And when I mean horribly, I'm talking scheme-wise from Jay Bateman, not Dre Bly as the corners coach. I think Tony Grimes could end up being the best corner that Notre Dame plays this year. And then we had a conversation about him as like he should be going into a sophomore year right now. And I think that's going to hurt North Carolina. But I do think he's going to break out this year and be a really good corner. I thought he was pretty good down the stretch last year. I think he's a good player. I think that when you look at Cameron Kelly, I think he's a solid player. I think North Carolina, if they can get any kind of pass rush whatsoever, which I think they should be able to get because they actually have some decent young players. If they get any kind of pass rush this year, I think their secondary is going to be pretty good. I think off the top of my head, they're in there. You know who else has a surprisingly decent couple of secondary players? Stanford. Stanford's got a couple of pretty they got
Kyru Blue Kelly or whatever his name is. Yeah.
And they had another safety last year that when he played, he was pretty good. He just was banged up a lot. And I cannot for the life of me remember that kid's name.
Someone just said something I wanted to say in this chat too. Garrett Williams from Syracuse is a stud.
He's a good player.
Really good corner.
But overall the secondary is not that good.
Nah, they have one safety that's decent beside him, but as a whole, you're right. I would say
Jonathan McGill. That's who it was.
Jonathan McGill.
He was out most of the year, came back late. He's a pretty decent football player, in my opinion. So, yeah, he'd be another one. And I think he's back, correct? Isn't he back?
I think so.
He was a junior last year. Yeah.
Yeah, most likely back.
So him and Blue are two pretty good players, in my opinion.
Yeah, Blue's not a bad player. I would honestly, I think as a season as a whole, maybe not as much when Notre Dame plays them. I would still probably, I think, defer to Ohio State because I think they have the most talent.
I think that says a lot about the secondaries that Notre Dame plays this year.
Yes. Well, no argument. There's not a lot of great secondaries Notre Dame's playing this year. You're not wrong.
Difference between Ohio State and USC is last year USC actually had some decent players. They just weren't coached well.
Correct.
A lot of the guys they have are gone, and they're getting Bryson Shaw from Ohio State to is supposed to be one of their better guys this year. And I don't see it. Yeah. But I think North Carolina could end up having the best second, not the best defense. Their defense won't be that great. And I think Coach Chiswick's going to get them better, but the floor is so low. I mean, the starting point is so bad but I do think their secondary is long and athletic, and I think Tony Grimes could end up being the best corner that they play this year. He's not right now. He's got. I'm projecting, right? I'm projecting that.
If they hit their ceilings in that secondary, I would say they probably have the best corner duo on the schedule because Storm Duck's actually kind of liked by NFL circles a little bit, and Tony Grimes has a lot more upside than Storm Duck does. So.
And I think Cameron Kelly in a better defense will be a good. He was good at times last year. As a safety.
Is he number 9? Is he number 9?
Yes, I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. I have to look at their schedule. He's another Virginia kid, and I'm trying. It's not because he's from Virginia. Just pointing out. I mean, they've had some Virginia guys that end up being pretty good at North Carolina. There's this guy. I'm not sure if you remember him, Lawrence Taylor.
Never heard of him.
He was pretty good. Dre Bly, he's pretty good. He's from Virginia. So yeah, he's pretty good. So that's it. So hey, everybody, this was a really fun show. Appreciate everybody being part of it. That's going to do it for today's podcast. Lots of great questions. Timeout, Tom. My answer doesn't change from Ohio State to BYU from starters. So I didn't ignore your question, but it doesn't change. It would have to be injury related. But that's it for today, everybody. Thank you all so much. Make sure you check out the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Always check out our website, irishbreakdown.com. That every article we post at irishbreakdown.com is free. So you definitely want to check that out. And of course, the premium stuff is on our message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. And before you go, hit that like button, everybody. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast. Ryan, thank you for joining me today. We'll be back tomorrow for our mailbag, our Friday mailbag, which will start at 1 o'clock. So we won't have to mess around with it this week like we did last week. We're just going to have our mailbag at 1 o'clock. We'll get into a ton of your questions. And of course, it's the day where you all get to determine what we talk about. So I'm very much looking forward to it. So thanks for joining us, everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very, very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.